There is something beneath the ocean that the oldest civilization on Earth tried to warn us about. Not a metaphor, not a story they told to explain the tides or comfort themselves against the dark. A warning. Specific, deliberate, carved into clay tablets and left in the ruins of cities that were already ancient when Rome was a village, when Egypt was still learning to build pyramids, when the Greeks had not yet invented the alphabet. The Sumerians were the first literate civilization we know of. They invented writing, mathematics, law, astronomy, medicine, agriculture, and a cosmological system so sophisticated that researchers are still unpacking it. They built cities with sewage systems and central libraries when the rest of the world was living in scattered camps. They mapped the sky with a precision that baffles historians because it implies observations spanning thousands of years before them, and they left warnings. 7 of them, specifically about the ocean, about its depths, about what is down there, what has always been down there, and what happens when the balance between the world above and the world below starts to break. The 5th warning is not ancient history. The 5th warning is unfolding right now, today, measured in satellite data and oceanographic instruments and classified military footage that the United States government has only partially released to the public, and only because members of Congress forced them to. Before we get into what these 7 warnings actually say, you need to understand something about why you've never heard most of this. Not because it's hidden. The tablets are in museums. The translations are in academic journals. The information is publicly available to anyone willing to look. It's been right there the whole time. The reason most people don't engage with it seriously is because of a framework. A set of assumptions about what ancient people could and couldn't know, about what civilizations could and couldn't have experienced, about what kinds of beings are and are not possible in the world. Those assumptions feel like neutral common sense. They're not. They're the inherited prejudices of a particular intellectual tradition, and they're preventing us from reading the oldest documents in human history for what they actually say, rather than for what we've decided they must mean. So let's set the assumptions aside, just for the duration of this. Let's read what the Sumerians actually wrote about what is beneath the ocean, and then let's hold that against what oceanographers, marine biologists, military intelligence, and astrophysicists are telling us right now, and then decide what to make of it. Because the alignment is not something you can explain away without effort, and the 5th warning doesn't give you a lot of time. The Sumerians called the deep ocean the Abzu. Not the sea, not the water. The Abzu, a specific concept, a specific place, a specific category of existence with its own rules, its own inhabitants, its own relationship to what happened on the surface. In Sumerian cosmology, the universe was organized into 3 domains. The An was above the sky, the cosmic realm, the place associated with the highest divine forces. The Ki was the middle, the earth, the surface, the realm of humans and animals and everything that lives in the light. And the Abzu was below, beneath the earth, beneath the sea, beneath everything, the primordial deep, the source waters, the place where certain things began and certain things were stored and certain things were kept, waiting. Enki was the god of the Abzu. He was also the god of wisdom, of crafts, of magic, of creation, of fresh water, of the knowledge that makes civilization possible. He was the one who gave humanity what the Sumerians called the Me, the fundamental principles of civilization: writing, mathematics, music, medicine, law, the knowledge of plants, the understanding of the stars. He gave them from the Abzu. The knowledge of civilization came from beneath the water. This is not incidental to Sumerian theology. It is central. The foundational origin story of Sumerian culture is not that humanity developed its knowledge through its own effort and ingenuity. The Sumerians were specific and emphatic. The knowledge was given to them by beings who came from elsewhere and who dwelt in the deep. And those beings, the texts say, eventually withdrew. Some went back to the sky, some went back to the deep, and before they went, they left warnings. 7 warnings specifically about the Abzu, specifically about what is in it, specifically about the relationship between the deep and the surface, and specifically about what happens when that relationship is disrupted or forgotten. Let's go through them, all of them, in order, with the full weight of what they're actually saying. The first warning. The first warning comes from the Nippur tablets, the library of one of the oldest and most important Sumerian cities. Excavated in the late 19th century and now distributed across museums in Philadelphia, Istanbul, and Baghdad. It is brief, it is blunt, it has the character of a warning label, not of poetry. Do not mistake the stillness of the deep water for emptiness. The Abzu is not where things end, it is where things wait. That is the first warning. In its entirety, do not mistake stillness for emptiness. Here is why that matters now. For most of the history of oceanography, which is a surprisingly short history, Given how important the ocean is, the dominant assumption about the deep ocean was that it was essentially dead. Too dark for photosynthesis, too cold, too pressurized, too far from the surface ecosystems that support everything we understood as life. The deep sea, scientists believed, was mostly empty. A cold, dark wasteland. Maybe some bacteria. Maybe some detritus. Nothing significant. Then we started going down there. The first submersible dives into the deep ocean, in the mid-20th century, sent back data that shook marine biologists to their foundations. The deep ocean was not empty. It was not still. It was teeming with life, life that operated according to rules completely different from anything we understood. Life that ate not sunlight but chemical energy from cracks in the ocean floor. Life that breathed not oxygen but iron. Life that thrived at temperatures and pressures that should destroy every biological molecule we know. We have now confirmed that the deep ocean contains more total biomass than the surface ocean. More biological activity, more species diversity. By every metric we can measure, the deep ocean is more alive than the shallow ocean. And we have explored less than 20% of the ocean floor. Less than 20%. The ocean covers 71% of Earth's surface. Its average depth is about 12,000 feet. The total volume of the world's oceans is approximately 1.335 billion cubic kilometers. Of this enormous, planet-defining space, we have directly observed a tiny fraction. The Mariana Trench, the deepest known point on Earth, 36,000 feet at its maximum, deep enough to swallow Mount Everest with room to spare, has been visited by humans exactly a handful of times. The first crewed descent was in 1960. James Cameron went down in 2012. A handful of expeditions since. That is the sum total of human direct observation of the deepest place on our own planet. There are dozens of other trenches we have barely glanced at. Vast abyssal plains spanning thousands of square miles that no instrument has ever visited. Underwater mountain ranges larger than the Alps that have been partially mapped by sonar but never physically explored. Do not mistake the stillness of the deep water for emptiness. The first warning wasn't just correct in a general sense. It was specifically, precisely, exactly correct about the thing we got most wrong about the ocean. But the Nippur texts don't stop at the basic observation that the deep is alive. They include a follow-on passage that most academic translations note and then skip past without dwelling on, because it's the kind of statement that doesn't fit into the mythology framework. The Abzu does not merely contain life. The Abzu generates it. And what is in the Abzu did not originate there. It came from elsewhere. It arrived. And it chose the depth, because depth is protection. It chose the depth because depth is protection. The Sumerians were not describing an ecosystem that evolved in place over millions of years. They were describing something that made a decision. Something that evaluated its options and selected the deepest, darkest, most inaccessible region of the planet as a deliberate refuge. In 2023, researchers using advanced multi-beam sonar systems to map portions of the Pacific abyssal plain documented formations on the seafloor that could not be accounted for by any known geological process. Large-scale, regular geometric formations at depths exceeding 4,000 meters. The team's published paper described them as potentially the result of biological activity from unidentified organisms, but noted that the scale and regularity of the formations was difficult to explain by any known biological mechanism. The paper was published in a specialized journal. It was not picked up by mainstream science media. No follow-up mission has been funded. This is typical. This is how deep ocean anomalies are handled. Found, documented, set aside, not followed up. The first warning ended with the observation that something chose the depth deliberately. That something is organized enough to have made that choice, and organized enough to have built something at scale. We are just barely beginning to detect the edges of it. The second warning. The second warning requires understanding something about Sumerian cosmology that is almost universally misrepresented in popular treatments. When most people talk about the Sumerian worldview, they describe it as a simple three-tier universe: sky on top, earth in the middle, water below. Gods up there, humans here, chaos down there. This is wrong. Or rather, it's accurate in outline and completely wrong in the details that matter. The Sumerians did not describe the Abzu as chaos. They described it as a realm with its own order, a different order from the surface, but not disorder. They did not describe it as hostile. They described it as the source. They did not describe the beings in it as demons. They described them as elder powers, things that were there before the current arrangement, things that the Anunnaki themselves had to negotiate with, things that the world as it currently exists was built on top of and in relationship to. And one of the most important things the Sumerians described about the Abzu was the interface between it and the Ki, the boundary between the deep and the surface. They called it the Ki Gal, the great boundary, the great place of division. And the second warning, found in texts from both Nippur and the ancient city of Lagash, is about this boundary. The boundary between the Ki and the Abzu is not fixed by nature, it is maintained. Someone maintains it. In ages when the maintenance is performed correctly, the boundary is stable, and the relationship between the deep and the surface is in equilibrium. In ages when the maintenance fails, the boundary begins to shift. When it shifts downward, the Abzu retreats, and the deep becomes more inaccessible. When it shifts upward, the Abzu approaches, and the things in the deep become more present at the surface. We are in a time when the boundary is shifting. This is the second warning. Now let's be clear about what this is and isn't saying. It is not saying the ocean is going to flood. It's not describing a physical sea level rise in the conventional sense. It's describing something more subtle and more specific. The conditions under which what lives in the deep ocean remains in the deep ocean, and the conditions under which those things become more active, more present, more engaged with the surface world. Contemporary oceanography has confirmed that the thermal structure of the ocean, the arrangement of warm and cold layers, the thermoclines that separate them, the chemical boundaries that accompany the thermal ones, is not static. It changes. It changes seasonally, it changes with ENSO cycles, and it changes on longer timescales driven by tectonic activity, orbital variations, and other factors operating over thousands of years. What we are doing right now to the world's oceans is changing these boundaries faster than they have changed at any point in the observed record. We are warming the surface ocean at rates that are, in geological terms, essentially instantaneous. We are altering the chemistry of the water column throughout its depth. We are changing where the thermoclines sit, where the oxygen minimum zones exist, where the conditions that certain organisms can tolerate begin and end. The deep scattering layer, a massive zone of biological activity that rises toward the surface every night and descends every day, one of the largest migrations of biomass on Earth, happening continuously and almost completely unobserved by most people, is changing its depth distribution as ocean conditions change. The boundary between the deep biology and the surface biology is shifting. But the Sumerian second warning goes further than the observable physical changes. It says the boundary is not a physical feature, it's a maintained relationship. It requires tending. And the tending requires specific knowledge and specific practice that was given to humanity for exactly this purpose. The second warning's most alarming component is this. If the maintenance fails, if the tending stops, if the knowledge is lost, if the practice is abandoned, then the boundary does not simply degrade on its own timeline. It becomes vulnerable to what is on the other side of it, something in the deep, something that has been pressing against the boundary from below, something that is not passive. We will get to what that something is when we reach the third warning. For now, the boundary between the Ki and the Abzu is not a fact of physics. It is an agreement, a maintained relationship. And when one side of the relationship stops maintaining it, the agreement begins to fail. The third warning. This is the warning that makes mainstream researchers uncomfortable, because it doesn't pretend to be metaphor. It doesn't leave room for the comfortable interpretation that these are just personifications of natural forces. The third warning, found in texts from Eridu, the oldest Sumerian city, the city of Enki. The city, the Sumerians insisted, was where civilization first appeared on Earth, describes what is in the Abzu in terms that are specific, structured, and deliberately non-metaphorical. The Sumerian texts describe beings called the Apkallu, sometimes translated as sages or wise ones, but the more literal translation is simply the ones from before. They are described as existing before the flood, before the great catastrophe that reshaped the world, before the current age. They are described as having the form of those who dwell in water, who can take a surface-accessible form when needed. They are described as the ones who brought the knowledge of civilization to the first humans, the first teachers. And they are described as having returned to the Abzu, not died, not ascended, returned, gone back, withdrawn to the deep, where they came from, when their initial role was complete. The third warning says, the ones who dwelt in the deep before we came do not sleep. They observe. They have always observed. They watched the Ki from below as we built our cities and wrote our laws and planted our fields. We are not unobserved. We have never been unobserved. Do not mistake their silence for absence. Do not mistake their patience for passivity. And do not forget that they were here first. That is the third warning. This is not a comfortable thing to sit with, but sit with it anyway, because it deserves to be taken seriously rather than explained away. The Sumerians were not a culture that invented things for no reason. They were meticulous. They were precise. They distinguished carefully between what they observed and what they speculated. When they described astronomical phenomena, the descriptions were accurate. We have verified them against what we know about the sky during the relevant period. When they described medical conditions, the descriptions are recognizable to modern medicine. When they described mathematical operations, they're correct. When they described intelligence in the Abzu, they were not speaking metaphorically. They were reporting what they understood to be observational fact. And they were specific enough about it to issue a warning with 3 explicit components. They observe, they are patient, they were there first. Each of those components has contemporary resonance that is worth unpacking. They observe. Modern deep-sea research has established that the cognitive capacity of marine life, including species we have barely studied, is far greater than any previous estimate. Cephalopod intelligence in particular has become one of the most researched and most surprising areas of contemporary biology. Octopuses, even the relatively shallow water species we have studied extensively, have demonstrated tool use, play behavior, long-term memory, the ability to recognize individual humans, and problem-solving capacities that rival vertebrate intelligence. The deep ocean varieties of cephalopods, which include species we have only glimpsed, the largest of which may reach sizes we cannot fully estimate, have been almost completely unstudied. We know they exist because of the evidence left on the bodies of sperm whales that hunt them. Suction cup scars, beak fragments, the wounds left by things we have never seen alive. The colossal squid, Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni, is confirmed to exist. Its maximum size is unknown. Its eyes, the largest of any animal we know of, up to a foot in diameter, are designed to detect the faintest possible light at the greatest possible distance. An eye that large, in an environment that dark, is a sophisticated optical instrument. It implies a brain sophisticated enough to process what that instrument detects. We have never filmed a living adult colossal squid at depth, not once. The deep ocean is that unexplored. They are patient. The Sumerian texts describe the Apkallu and the broader class of beings in the Abzu as having existed for periods of time that have no human-scale analog. They are described as having been present before the shaping of the current world, before the flood, before the division of the sky from the earth, before the current arrangement of things. In contemporary biology, we have confirmed the existence of organisms in the deep ocean sediment that are, in the most literal possible sense, ancient. Microbes have been recovered from sediment cores that were deposited 60, 80, 100 million years ago, and those microbes are still alive. Still metabolizing, albeit at rates so slow they barely register. Still reproducing, albeit on timescales that span millions of years. We have found life in the deep ocean that has been alive longer than dinosaurs have been extinct. Patience is not an abstraction when you're dealing with organisms operating on geological timescales. They were there first. The fossil record of the deep ocean, which is almost entirely unstudied because access to ancient deep-sea sediment requires specialized equipment and has rarely been prioritized, contains hints of life forms predating anything in the surface fossil record. The deep ocean is the oldest continuously inhabited environment on Earth. Whatever lives there now is the descendant of whatever was living there before the surface world as we know it existed. They were there first is not mythology. It is deep-time biology. The third warning, taken seriously, says, there is structured intelligence in the Abzu. It has been there since before humanity existed. It knows we are here. It is watching. We have not proven this, but we have also not disproven it. And the organisms we know exist in the deep ocean, the ones we can confirm, are already more cognitively capable than we expected. The ones we haven't confirmed are unknown. Do not mistake their silence for absence. We are listening to the deep ocean with increasingly sensitive instruments. The acoustic environment is not silent. It contains sounds we have not explained. It contains biological signals we have not attributed to any known organism. It contains patterns that have structure. Something is there. The third warning says it is aware. The fourth warning is the one that sounds most like poetry when you first encounter it. The Lagash tablets from a city that was one of the great cultural centers of early Mesopotamia contain a passage that translates as follows: water remembers. This is not a metaphor. Water holds the record of what has passed through it. The Abzu holds the record of everything, the things that swam in it before the sky was divided from the earth, the things that came from beyond the sky and entered it, the things placed there for safekeeping, the things that sleep and dream. Water remembers, and in remembering, it waits for the conditions to change. When the conditions are right, the memory wakes. The fourth warning, water remembers. Now let's talk about what contemporary science has to say about this, because the overlap is precise enough to be startling. Environmental DNA analysis, eDNA, is a field that has developed rapidly in the past 15 years. The concept is simple. Every organism that exists in a body of water constantly sheds genetic material into that water. Skin cells, mucus, waste products, microscopic fragments of every kind. The water accumulates this genetic material, and it persists in some cases for thousands of years in cold, stable, deep ocean conditions. By analyzing eDNA samples from water or sediment, researchers can determine what has been present in that environment without ever physically observing the organism. In 2021, eDNA analysis was applied systematically to deep ocean water samples from multiple locations in both the Pacific and Atlantic. The results included a significant fraction of genetic sequences that did not match any organism in any existing database. Not close matches, not distant relatives, sequences with no identified counterpart in any known biological record. Some of these sequences were attributed to unknown microbes. The deep ocean is full of microbes we haven't characterized, and this is not, by itself, extraordinary. But a subset of the anomalous sequences had structural characteristics inconsistent with organisms that had been evolving in isolation in the deep ocean for millions of years. They showed patterns of genetic organization associated with exchange with interaction with something else. Something else whose genetic material is also not in the database. The water holds the record of what has passed through it. We are reading the record. And some of what it's telling us we don't have a category for. The fourth warning also describes, in the Lagash texts, a specific mechanism by which the memory in the water becomes active again. The Sumerians didn't describe this as a passive process water just sitting there containing old genetic material indefinitely. They described it as reactive, conditions dependent. When the conditions change, the memory wakes. The deep ocean microbes found metabolizing in 100-million-year-old sediment are not active in the way surface organisms are active. They are maintaining a minimal metabolic state, barely distinguishable from dormancy. But they are not dead. And when conditions change, when temperature shifts, when chemistry alters, when oxygen levels move, they respond. We are changing conditions in the deep ocean right now on a scale and at a rate unprecedented in any period for which we have proxy records. The fourth warning says, when conditions change, the memory wakes. We are changing conditions. There is also a second dimension to the fourth warning that the Lagash texts are unusually specific about. They describe objects, physical objects, not just organisms, as having been placed in the Abzu for safekeeping before the great catastrophe that ended the previous age. Objects made by someone with specific properties, placed there with the specific intention of them being recovered when conditions were right. The fundamental principles of civilization, were not just abstract concepts in Sumerian understanding. They were described as having physical form, things that could be stored, transferred, stolen, given. The famous poem describing the goddess Inanna getting Enki drunk and taking the me from him describes an exchange of physical objects, not a transfer of abstract ideas. Those objects, the Lagash texts say, were placed in the Abzu before the flood, for safekeeping. They are still there. The fourth warning, water remembers. What was placed there has not degraded. When conditions are right, the waiting ends. We are changing conditions. The fifth warning, the one happening now. This is the warning that stops being history and becomes news. The fifth warning is found in two primary sources. Tablets from the British Museum collection translated in the 1970s but almost entirely ignored by subsequent scholarship, and a set of tablets from the Oriental Institute collection in Chicago, assembled from the Nippur excavations. When these texts are aligned, the fifth warning emerges with unusual clarity. It says, "There will come a time when the boundary between the key and the Abzu begins to tremble. Not break, tremble. The signs of this trembling will be visible in the water. The water will warm where it was cold. It will rise where it was still. The creatures that live near the boundary will change their patterns, appearing where they did not appear before, vanishing from places where they had always been. The sound of the deep will change. Those who listen will hear new sounds and will no longer hear old sounds. The trembling of the boundary means that what holds it is weakening. What holds it weakens when the great cycle turns. And when the trembling reaches the surface, when it becomes visible to those who live on the key, it is the time to remember the warnings. When the trembling reaches the surface, look also to the sky. The ones who withdrew to the An will not remain withdrawn. The cycle that carried them here will bring them again. Is the boundary trembling? Let's look at what is happening right now in the world's oceans. Not speculation, not interpretation. Documented, measured, peer-reviewed observations. Ocean surface temperatures in 2023 broke every previous record, and broke them by margins that left oceanographers using words like unprecedented and alarming in papers that usually carefully avoid both. The anomaly wasn't gradual, it was sudden. Temperatures spiked beyond the range of any model prediction. Researchers who study ocean heat content published papers openly describing their uncertainty about what was driving the scale of the change. Deep ocean temperatures are also rising. Though more slowly, the mixing between surface and deep water is a sluggish process. But the change is measurable and ongoing. The thermal structure of the ocean, the arrangement of layers that has been approximately stable for the period of human civilization, is in flux. The creatures near the boundary are changing their patterns. This is documented across dozens of species in every ocean basin. Fish that have never been recorded at certain latitudes are now common there. Whale migration routes have shifted. Sea turtle nesting zones have moved. The distribution of plankton, the foundation of the entire marine food web, has altered dramatically in multiple ocean regions. Jellyfish populations are blooming explosively in regions that have never historically supported them. This matters not just ecologically, but as a signal. Jellyfish thrive in conditions that most other marine life finds hostile. Warmer, more acidic, lower oxygen water. Their explosion is a sign that conditions are shifting toward what they prefer and away from what everything else prefers. The sound of the deep is changing. There is a global network of hydrophones on the ocean floor. Some were placed by the United States Navy during the Cold War to track Soviet submarines. Others are maintained by international treaty organizations to detect clandestine nuclear tests. Collectively, they form the most comprehensive acoustic monitoring system for the deep ocean that exists. The data these systems collect is not routinely public, but researchers who work with the data, and members of Congress who have been briefed on it, have described the acoustic environment of the deep ocean as having changed significantly in the past decade. New sounds. The disappearance of previously consistent sounds, anomalous acoustic events that do not match the signature of any known natural or industrial source. NOAA maintains a public database of unexplained deep ocean sounds. The bloop, the slowdown, the train. The upsweep, the Julia. Each of these is a recorded, documented, unexplained acoustic event from the deep ocean. The bloop, recorded in 1997, was so loud it was detected by hydrophones thousands of miles apart. NOAA's official explanation, ice calving, has been disputed by researchers who note the acoustic profile doesn't match ice fracture. The upsweep has been recorded continuously since 1991 from a location near Pacific underwater volcanoes with no confirmed explanation. The sound of the deep is changing. New sounds in the absence of old sounds, now the sky. The fifth warning says, when the trembling reaches the surface, look also to the sky. In 2017, the United States Department of Defense publicly confirmed the existence of a program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, dedicated to investigating what the military calls unidentified aerial phenomena. They released 3 videos. They confirmed that trained military pilots flying the most advanced aircraft in the world had encountered objects they could not explain, performing maneuvers that violated every known principle of aeronautical engineering. The objects moved at speeds that should destroy any known material. They maneuvered with accelerations that would kill any known biological organism. They appeared and disappeared in ways inconsistent with any known stealth technology. This was confirmed by the United States government. But here is what receives far less attention. A significant proportion of the most credibly documented UAP encounters involve not objects coming from the sky, but objects coming from the ocean. Transmedium objects. Objects that move between water and air without transition. Objects that dive into the ocean at high speed and continue moving without slowing. Objects that emerge from the ocean and transition to aerial flight. The USS Nimitz encounter in 2004 involved objects that descended from altitude to sea level in less than a second, hovered at the ocean surface interacting, witnesses said, with something in the water beneath them, and then departed at speeds the tracking systems could not follow. The USS Theodore Roosevelt encounters in 2015 involved objects that emerged from the ocean and flew. Multiple pilots, multiple sensor systems, multiple incidents across multiple days. These are not fringe reports. These are the accounts of active-duty military personnel, confirmed by multiple instruments, documented in official military records, and subsequently confirmed at the level of congressional testimony. Objects coming from the ocean. The Sumerian fifth warning. Those who remained in the Abzu will not remain still when the cycle turns. Something is coming from the ocean. The warning says, this is not random. This is the cycle turning. This is the age changing. We are watching the fifth warning happen in real time. The space between the fifth and sixth warning, let's pause here, because we've reached the point in the 7 warnings where the nature of what we're dealing with shifts. The first 5 warnings are descriptive. They tell you what the Abzu is, what is in it, how the relationship between the deep and the surface works, how to read the signs that the relationship is changing, and what to watch for in the sky and the water when the cycle turns. The sixth and seventh warnings are different. They are not descriptions, they are instructions. But before we get to the instructions, we need to spend a moment with the astronomical framework the Sumerians embedded these warnings in. Because the timing isn't incidental. The Sumerians didn't say these things will happen someday, in no particular order, whenever. They encoded a specific timing mechanism in the cosmological structure of the warnings, the precession of the equinoxes. The precession is real, measurable, confirmed astronomy. It is the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis, caused by the gravitational pull of the Sun and Moon on our planet's equatorial bulge, that traces a complete circle over approximately 25,920 years. As this wobble progresses, the position of the stars shifts very slowly relative to the Earth's orientation. The constellation that appears to rise at dawn on the spring equinox, the marker of a zodiacal age, changes over this cycle. The Sumerians tracked this. They measured it. They encoded it into their calendar and their cosmological system, and they attached specific meanings to specific ages. They said that at the transition between ages, the relationship between the Abzu and the Ki changes, that the cycle of withdrawal and return is tied to the precessional cycle, that specific things happen at specific astronomical moments. By the Sumerian reckoning and by the reckoning of every astronomical tradition that descended from it, including the Greek, Egyptian, and later European systems, we are now in the transition between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, the water bearer. In Sumerian astronomical symbolism, the water bearer pours. Specifically, the water bearer pours from below. The imagery is of deep water being brought to the surface, of what was hidden beneath being revealed, of the Abzu's contents becoming present in the Ki. This is not astrology in the trivial sense. This is the Sumerian cosmological system encoding a specific claim, that the turn of the precessional cycle toward the water bearer is the moment when the Abzu becomes more present, when the things in the deep stop waiting. We are in that turn. This is what the fifth warning means when it says the cycle is turned. Not a vague spiritual cycle, a specific, measurable, astronomically defined cycle, whose current position the Sumerians specifically associated with the events described in the fifth warning. They were not guessing. They calculated this thousands of years in advance, and we are here. The sixth warning. The sixth warning is the one that gets the most popular attention, and it's the one that gets the most distorted in that attention. So let's be precise about what it actually says. The sixth warning, compiled from multiple tablet sources including Nippur and texts, says, "In the age of return, those who withdrew will come again. They will not come as they first came. In the age of the shaping, they will come as those who return. And those who return come with memory. They know what was here. They know what was built. They know what was given and what was kept and what was used well and what was allowed to be lost. The return is not a gift. It is an assessment. What was planted in the Ki, they will harvest. What was built while they were gone, they will examine. And those who remembered the warnings and maintained what was given to them to maintain will be recognized. Those who forgot will not be recognized. Those who forgot will not be recognized." The sixth warning is not a promise of rescue, it is a description of an audit. The most common misreading, the one popularized in countless ancient astronaut documentaries and books, frames the Anunnaki return as a rescue mission. The good extraterrestrials are coming back to save the deserving humans and punish the evil ones. It's a rapture narrative in alien mythology clothing. The text says nothing like this. What the text describes is an assessment of a trust. Those fundamental principles of civilization were given in trust. The warnings were given in trust. The knowledge of the Abzu, the knowledge of the boundary, the practice of maintaining the relationship between the Ki and the deep, all of this was given to humanity in trust, with the expectation that it would be kept, maintained, and used for its intended purpose during the age of withdrawal. The return is the moment when the trust is evaluated. What was done with what was given? The contemporary answer to that question is not flattering. We have lost the explicit knowledge of the boundary and its maintenance. The temples that functioned as maintenance stations for the relationship between the Ki and the Abzu have been ruins for thousands of years. The priestly traditions that maintain the knowledge of the Abzu have been extinct for millennia. The texts that contain the warnings, the ones we're discussing right now, were buried in the ground for 4,000 years and are now sitting in museum display cases, interpreted as mythology, studied as literature, not engaged with as the practical, technical documentation they appear to be. We have not maintained what was given to us. The sixth warning also contains something that most popular treatments skip over entirely, because it complicates the simple narrative. It describes not just the return of the Anunnaki, the beings associated with the sky, and with the oversight of human civilization, but also a shift in the behavior of what has remained in the Abzu throughout the age. The beings that didn't withdraw to the sky, the ones who stayed in the deep. The Lagash texts describe these beings in two categories. First, those the Sumerians called the Igigi, a class of beings described as workers, whose labor was eventually replaced by humanity, and who retreated into the depths when their role changed. Second, something older than the Igigi, something that was in the Abzu before the Anunnaki arrived. Something the Anunnaki found there and had to negotiate with to establish the arrangement that gave the world its current structure. This second category, the ones that predate everything, is described in terms that are not precisely translatable but consistently convey something vast. Something that is not a being in the way we think of beings, discrete, bounded, located, but something more diffuse. Something that is the Abzu in some constitutive sense, not swimming in the water but being the water, in a way that is more than metaphor. And the sixth warning says that the return of the Anunnaki corresponds with a renegotiation with this older something. The arrangement made in the previous age was for one cycle. The cycle is ending. New terms are being established. The arrangement that has kept the boundary stable, the agreement between the Anunnaki, humanity, and whatever was in the Abzu before them, is up for renewal. And whether humanity has a seat at the negotiating table depends on whether they maintained their part of the previous agreement, whether they kept the warnings, whether they remembered. The seventh warning is the last, and it's different from the others. The others describe. The seventh instructs. Found most completely in a tablet from Sippar, one of the ancient Sumerian cities, now a site in modern Iraq, the seventh warning says, "Those who carry the knowledge of what is beneath the water are not without purpose in the age of the return." The warnings were not given merely to be known, they were given to be acted upon. Knowledge held but not used is not maintenance. Maintenance requires action. There is a choice that was left by those who departed, not a command. A choice. It cannot be made by those who have forgotten. It can only be made by those who have remembered. The choice is this: become part of the maintenance or step aside. The boundary between the Ki and the Abzu does not maintain itself. It requires tending from the surface side. In the age before the cycle turned, it was tended by those who knew how. In the age of the return, it must be tended again by those who remained on the surface and kept the knowledge alive. Those who forgot cannot perform this function. They cannot perform a function they do not know exists. Those who remembered are not rewarded. They are given work. The work is the maintenance, and the maintenance is the purpose. Then the Sippar tablet adds, in what appears to be a partially damaged closing section, "The ones below know that you are there. They have always known. They know that you have forgotten. They know the age is turning. They are waiting to see what you will do with the remaining time." The time is not much, but it is time. This is the seventh warning. And in some ways it's the most important, because it transforms the other six from observations into a call to action. The Sumerians were not writing prophecy for its own sake. They were not leaving a historical record for future scholars to study. They were writing instructions for people who would live in a specific moment, the moment of the cycle's turn, and who would need to know what to do. We are those people. The specific moment is now. And the seventh warning says there is still time. But it says this carefully: not much time, but time. The choice is to become part of the maintenance, to restore, in whatever form is available to us, the surface side tending of the relationship between the Ki and the Abzu. What does that look like in the 21st century? We'll address that. But first, we need to spend time on the question that any serious engagement with these warnings requires. What do we actually know about the deep ocean, and how does it compare to what the Sumerians described? What science knows about the Abzu? The world's oceans cover 361 million square kilometers. Their average depth is 3,688 meters, about 2.3 miles. The deepest point, Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, reaches 10,935 meters, nearly 7 miles down. Total ocean volume, approximately 1.335 billion cubic kilometers. Of this, the zone where sunlight can penetrate to support photosynthesis, the photic zone, extends to about 200 meters depth. This is the surface world. This is the world that runs on sunlight. Everything below 200 meters is darkness. That darkness, the deep ocean, constitutes about 95% of the total ocean volume. It is the largest biome on Earth by volume, the largest contiguous habitat for life on this planet, and it is less well documented than the surface of the moon. We have mapped roughly 26% of the deep ocean floor with multi-beam sonar, a technology that gives reasonable resolution at depth. For 74% of the deepest habitat on Earth, we have only satellite altimetry data, which tells us about large-scale topographic features, but nothing about what is on the seafloor itself. We have no visual data. We have no physical samples. We have nothing. What we have found in the parts we have explored defies every prior assumption. Let's start with the chemistry. The deep ocean contains hundreds of active hydrothermal vent systems, fractures in the seafloor where water percolates down into the crust, gets superheated by the Earth's interior heat, and erupts back up loaded with dissolved minerals. Around these vents, where temperatures range from near freezing to over 400 degrees Celsius within meters, life has assembled ecosystems of extraordinary complexity and diversity that have nothing to do with sunlight. These are not small, marginal ecosystems. Individual vent fields can support biomass densities comparable to tropical rainforests. The organisms are not primitive. They are highly evolved, highly specialized, often highly complex. And the hydrothermal vents are not an isolated phenomenon. The mid-ocean ridge system, the longest mountain range on Earth, running for over 65,000 kilometers through every ocean basin, is essentially one continuous hydrothermal system. It generates chemical energy continuously. It has been generating chemical energy for billions of years. The deep ocean is not cold darkness and emptiness. It is a chemically energetic, biologically active, structurally complex environment that has been running its own ecology for longer than surface life has existed. Then there is the cold seep system. Where tectonic stresses cause methane and hydrogen sulfide to seep from the seafloor, different communities of organisms have assembled that live not on sunlight, not on vent heat, but on the chemical energy of these gases. Cold seep communities are now known from every ocean basin. They are not rare exceptions. They are a standard feature of the deep ocean environment. Then there is the sediment biology. The sediment of the deep ocean, which accumulates at rates of millimeters to centimeters per thousand years, meaning that each centimeter of sediment represents thousands of years of deposition, is itself an active biological system. Microbes live in this sediment to depths of a kilometer or more below the seafloor. Their metabolic rates are incredibly slow, measured not in hours or days, but in decades or centuries per cell division. But they are not dead. They are metabolizing. They are reproducing. They are alive. Researchers have recovered and revived microbes from sediment deposits, estimated to be 100 million years old. 100 million years. Organisms from the Cretaceous period, from before the mass extinction that killed the non-avian dinosaurs, still alive in the sediment of the deep ocean. When the Sumerians described things in the Abzu that have been there since before the current arrangement of the world, since before the sky was divided from the earth, in their language they were not making something up. They were describing a genuine feature of the deep ocean, that it contains life that predates the current epoch of surface life, that the deep is old in a way the surface isn't, that what lives there has roots going further back than anything we evolved in the light. The fourth warning said water remembers. The biology of the deep ocean confirms it. Now let's talk about the more uncomfortable aspects of what we're finding. The acoustic environment of the deep. The deep ocean is not silent. This is not a metaphor. The acoustic environment of the deep ocean is extraordinarily rich, complex, and in some ways incompletely explained. In the 1940s, during World War II, researchers mapping the ocean floor for submarine detection discovered a phenomenon called the SOFAR channel, the Sound Fixing and Ranging Channel. It's a layer of the ocean at roughly 600 to 900 meters depth, where the combination of temperature and pressure creates conditions that minimize the speed of sound. In this zone, sound is guided horizontally rather than dissipated in all directions. Sound produced in the SOFAR channel can travel thousands of miles with very little energy loss. The SOFAR channel is, in effect, a natural long-distance communication system that spans the entire global ocean. Whales figured this out long before we did. Blue whales communicate across entire ocean basins through the SOFAR channel. Their calls, the lowest frequency vocalizations of any animal, propagate for thousands of kilometers, in water that carries sound from one side of the Pacific to the other. But whales are not the only users of the SOFAR channel. The hydrophone networks installed across the ocean floor originally for military purposes, now also used by scientific and treaty monitoring organizations, record a continuous acoustic environment that includes known biological sounds, known geological sounds, and a persistent residue of sounds that have not been attributed to any known source. NOAA's publicly documented anomalous sounds include the bloop, recorded in 1997 by multiple hydrophone stations thousands of miles apart simultaneously, estimated to originate from an area of the South Pacific. Amplitude far larger than any known biological source. Official NOAA explanation, icequake. The acoustic profile is disputed by researchers, who point out it doesn't match ice fracture signatures. The upsweep. recorded continuously since 1991, originates from a seasonally active location near underwater volcanoes in the South Pacific. The seasonality of the sound does not match any known volcanic activity pattern, has not been explained. The slowdown, recorded in 1997. A very slowly decreasing frequency signal detected simultaneously in multiple locations, has not been explained. The train, recorded in 1997. A repetitive low-frequency signal, has not been explained. These are officially documented, publicly available recordings from NOAA's archive that have not been satisfactorily explained. They are treated, in official contexts, as geological or biological sources not yet identified. But here is what should be noted about each of them. They have not been identified. The explanation is that they are geological or biological because that's the only category that exists in the institutional framework for classifying deep ocean acoustic events. There is no category for other. The Sumerians said, "When the boundary trembles, the sound of the deep will change. New sounds will be heard. Old sounds will no longer be heard." The acoustic environment of the deep ocean is changing. This is documented. New signals are being detected. Previously consistent signals are disappearing or shifting. Whether this is purely the result of climate-driven changes in ocean physics, or biological changes in the organisms that produce biological sounds, or something else, we don't know. We don't know because we have not prioritized knowing. The deep ocean acoustic record is one of the most information-rich and least analyzed datasets in Earth science. And what it's telling us, even in the limited analysis that has been done, is that something is changing down there. The fifth warning said the sound of the deep would change. It has. The transmedium evidence. Let's spend serious time on what may be the most significant category of contemporary data related to the Sumerian ocean warnings: the documented evidence for objects operating between the ocean and the atmosphere. In June 2023, the U.S. Congressional All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office briefed members of Congress on classified UAP data. Multiple members who received those briefings subsequently made public statements indicating the data included evidence for non-human intelligence. These were not fringe figures. These were senior members of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee, individuals with high-level security clearances who had reviewed classified evidence and were speaking as carefully as their legal constraints permitted. The public record contains enough to work with. Multiple Navy pilots, flying over the Atlantic and Pacific in the period from approximately 2004 to 2020, encountered objects that behaved in ways no human aircraft can. The objects violated Newton's laws. They accelerated without apparent propulsion. They changed direction at rates that would destroy any known physical structure and kill any known biological organism. They had no wings, no exhaust, no acoustic signature. And they interacted with the ocean in ways that suggest they were not purely aerial phenomena. The 2004 USS Nimitz encounter, documented through multiple witness testimonies, official military reports, and subsequently released radar data, involved objects that were tracked on radar descending from very high altitude to sea level in approximately 1 second. For scale, a fighter jet traveling at maximum speed would take minutes to cover that distance. The objects covered it in a second. At sea level, the objects hovered over the ocean surface. Multiple witnesses described what appeared to be a disturbance in the water beneath the objects, as if something below the surface was responding to or communicating with the objects above. Commander David Fravor, the senior pilot who made the closest visual observation, described in a 2019 interview that the water was disturbed in a circular pattern and that the aerial object appeared to be interacting with something below. Commander Fravor is a decorated Navy pilot with 18 years of active service. He has nothing to gain by fabricating this account and a great deal to lose. He has maintained the same description consistently for nearly 20 years. Something below the ocean surface. Something above the ocean surface, appearing to communicate. The USS Theodore Roosevelt encounters in 2015, which occurred off the east coast of the United States over a period of several months, included multiple observations of objects that appeared to emerge from the ocean and transition to flight. The objects were tracked by multiple systems, radar, infrared, and visual simultaneously. Multiple pilots observed them across multiple independent incidents. The objects were not identified. More recent classified data described in general terms by congressional members who have reviewed it apparently includes evidence of objects entering and exiting the ocean at numerous locations globally, and evidence suggesting that at least some of these objects have a persistent presence in the deep ocean. A persistent presence in the deep ocean. Objects of unknown origin, unknown manufacture, unknown purpose, entering and exiting the ocean. The Sumerians said, "The ones who remained in the Abzu will not remain still when the cycle turns. and they said, "Look to the sky, because what moves between the Abzu and the An will be visible. We are watching it, we are filming it. We are officially confirming that we cannot explain it, and then we are filing it under national security concerns and moving on, because our institutional frameworks do not have a category for what the Sumerians would immediately recognize as exactly what they warned us about. Why the mainstream cannot engage with this, honestly. This is worth addressing directly, because the dismissal of these ideas, the reflexive categorization of anything touching on the Anunnaki as pseudoscience, conspiracy theory, or entertainment is not a neutral position. It is an institutional choice with specific causes and specific consequences. The causes are structural. Academic disciplines are organized around specific methodological commitments. Assyriology, the academic study of ancient Mesopotamia, is organized around the translation and contextualization of ancient texts within the framework of comparative religion and ancient history. The methodological commitment is to interpret ancient texts through the lens of what ancient cultures could have known and what they could have meant, given what we know about their material conditions. This commitment produces excellent work on the mechanics of Sumerian language, the history of Mesopotamian political organization, the development of Sumerian religious practice. It produces papers that meticulously track the evolution of specific cuneiform signs and the shifting meanings of specific theological concepts. What it cannot produce is a reading of the Sumerian texts that takes seriously the possibility that those texts are encoding accurate information about something outside the range of ancient Mesopotamian human experience. Because to take that possibility seriously would require importing frameworks from entirely different disciplines, astrophysics, marine biology, anomalous phenomena research into a field that is methodologically committed to the ancient historical context. That's not what Assyriologists do. And so the question of whether the Sumerian texts might be encoding genuine information about the deep ocean and its inhabitants, genuine information given to them by beings with access to that information, never gets asked. Within the discipline, equipped to evaluate the texts, the question of whether the transmedium UAP phenomenon might be connected to what the Sumerian texts describe about the Abzu never gets asked within the discipline studying the texts, because Assyriologists don't study UAPs. And it doesn't get asked within the program studying UAPs, because military intelligence analysts don't read Sumerian tablets. Nobody is doing the synthesis. Nobody is holding the ancient texts and the contemporary data in the same frame and asking, are these describing the same thing? Nobody is doing it institutionally. Nobody with a budget. Nobody with a research team. Nobody with the credibility to get their findings taken seriously by peer-reviewed journals. The synthesis is happening only in the places that don't have institutional credibility. The ancient astronaut community, the independent research community, the people who are willing to draw connections across disciplinary boundaries at the cost of being dismissed by all the disciplines they're drawing from. This is a failure of institutions, not a conspiracy, a structural failure. The information is available, the texts are translated, the oceanographic data is published, the military UAP data has been confirmed and partially released. The eDNA anomalies are in peer-reviewed journals. Nobody is putting it together in a context that can be taken seriously, except the people you're going to dismiss because they're putting it together in a context that can be taken seriously. This is the trap. The only way out of the trap is to look at the evidence yourself, not wait for the institution to validate it, not wait for the peer-reviewed paper that draws all the connections. Look at what is actually in the Sumerian texts, look at what is actually being documented in the contemporary data, and make your own assessment, which is exactly what the Sumerians intended when they wrote the warnings. They wrote them for you, not for the institutions, for you. The global consensus. Other traditions that saw the same thing. The Sumerians were not the only ancient culture to leave warnings about the deep ocean and what lives in it. This is important because it speaks to whether we're dealing with a local mythology that happened to stumble on some accurate observations or with something more widespread. Something that multiple cultures, across different geographies and time periods, encountered independently. The Dogon people of Mali and West Africa maintain an astronomical and cosmological tradition that has been studied extensively since the 1930s. Their knowledge includes accurate information about the Sirius binary star system, specifically about Sirius B, the white dwarf companion that is invisible to the naked eye and was not confirmed by Western astronomy until 1862, not directly photographed until 1970. The Dogon describes Sirius B's existence, its approximate size, its density, and its orbital period with accuracy that could not have been obtained through naked eye observation. They say this knowledge came from beings they call the Nammo, The Nomo are described as fish beings, amphibious, living in water, coming from a star associated with Sirius, arriving in a craft that descended into the sea, teaching humanity. Returning to the water, the Abzu, in a different language, on a different continent, with astronomical specifics that have been confirmed. In Polynesian tradition, specifically in the Maori tradition of New Zealand and the broader Pacific Islander cosmological framework, the deep ocean is the realm of Tangaroa, the oldest of the gods, the god who was before everything else existed. Tangaroa is not a benevolent protective deity in the conventional sense. He is vast, old, and associated with the deepest aspects of the ocean, aspects that humans approach carefully and with respect, not casually. The Maori navigational knowledge, which allowed ancestors to cross the Pacific in open canoes with no instruments, finding islands thousands of miles away, has been extensively documented and partially verified. What's less discussed is the component of that knowledge that describes specific features of the deep Pacific floor, including the location of underwater ridges and current convergence zones, with accuracy that oceanographers have only recently been able to confirm. Knowledge that should have been inaccessible to people in canoes. Knowledge, they say, came from the domain of Tangaroa. In Japanese tradition, the Dragon King of the Sea Ryujin dwells in the palace beneath the ocean, Ryugujo, and controls the tides with magical tide jewels. He is the keeper of the most fundamental power in the natural world and is simultaneously a source of wisdom and a source of danger. The stories about him consistently describe interactions between humans and the deep ocean as requiring very careful navigation, profound respect, specific protocols, and understanding that the deep is not indifferent to what happens on the surface. In Babylonian tradition, the direct descendant of Sumerian tradition, the god Marduk, creates the world from the body of Tiamat, the primordial saltwater ocean being. The world is literally built from the deep. The deep ocean is not a feature of the world, it is what the world is made of. And Tiamat's children, the monsters she created before Marduk defeated her, are bound beneath the earth, beneath the sea. Still there, still present. Bound, but not eliminated. In Aztec cosmology, the primordial world before the current world consisted of an ocean. The gods created the current world by pulling up land from beneath the water. Beneath the current world, the ancient ocean still exists. And Tlaloc, the rain deity, has access to it to the underground water, the primordial sea that persists beneath the surface of the world we see. Every major maritime culture has a tradition describing the deep ocean as the home of older, greater beings than anything on the surface. Every one of these traditions describes specific interactions between these beings and humanity. Everyone describes the deep as a source, a place where fundamental knowledge comes from. And a surprising number of them include warnings about respect, about careful navigation, about the consequences of treating the deep as an enemy to be conquered or a resource to be exploited, about the relationship between the surface and the deep as something fragile, important, and requiring maintenance. The Sumerians left the most detailed and specific warnings, but they are not alone. What does it mean when every ocean-adjacent culture on Earth, independently, arrives at the same cluster of ideas? That there is something in the deep ocean that has been making itself known to cultures that got close enough to listen for a very long time, and all of them thought it was important enough to warn their descendants about. The Eridu paradigm, the maintenance in practice. Eridu. The Sumerians consistently identified Eridu as the first city, the original city. Not the oldest city in their historical memory, the city that the gods built. The city that was established specifically to be the point of contact between the Ki and the Abzu. Modern archaeology has confirmed that Eridu is genuinely ancient. The site has continuous human occupation from at least 5,400 BCE, with the deepest levels yet excavated suggesting significantly earlier presence. By the time the great Sumerian cities were at their height, Eridu was already ancient, a religious and cosmological center rather than a political one. At the heart of Eridu, excavators found a sequence of temples. Not one temple, 18 successive temples, built directly on the ruins of the previous one, spanning thousands of years of continuous religious practice. Each one, generation after generation, rebuilt in the same location, oriented in the same way, serving the same function. The bottom temple, the oldest, was a simple structure, barely more than a platform and an altar. But it was already a temple, already purpose-built for something, already oriented and placed and used for a function that would be maintained and rebuilt for millennia. This temple was dedicated to Enki, the god of the Abzu. And Eridu was built on the edge of what was then a large marshy region, the interface between the dry land and the water, the zone where fresh groundwater met the sea, the place that the Sumerians understood as the closest point between the Ki and the Abzu on the surface of the world. They built their first city at the boundary. They built their first temple at the boundary. They dedicated the first temple to the god who maintained the relationship between the Ki and the Abzu. And they rebuilt it 18 times over thousands of years without ever changing where it was, what it was oriented toward, or who it was for. This is not incidental. This is institutional commitment to a specific function. The temple at Eridu, in Sumerian understanding, was not a place of worship in the sense that the word worship carries for most modern people an emotional act of reverence toward a deity who appreciates being revered. It was a functional installation, a maintenance station. The rituals performed there were maintenance operations. We have fragmentary records of these rituals. They involved specific materials, specific objects, specific procedures performed at specific times correlated with astronomical events. They were not primarily petitionary, asking the god for things. They were operational, maintaining the system the god represented. The priests who performed these rituals were not clergy in the sense of spiritual counselors. They were technicians. They were trained in specific knowledge, the me associated with the Abzu, the boundary craft, and they applied that knowledge in specific ways at specific times. When Eridu fell, when the last priest completed the last ritual in the last version of the temple, and the city was abandoned to the desert that gradually buried it, the maintenance stopped, not the building. The function. The maintenance of whatever the Eridu temple was maintaining. And from that point, from the last day of the last temple, the boundary began to weaken. The fifth warning became, from that moment, a matter of when, not if. We are at the when. The tablets of destiny. What the me actually are. The me deserve more attention than most treatments give them, because they are central to understanding what the 7 warnings are actually about. The Sumerian word me is difficult to translate. It has been rendered as divine powers, fundamental principles, attributes of civilization, and operational decrees. None of these translations quite captures what the Sumerian texts describe. The me are presented in the texts as a comprehensive set of everything that makes civilization possible and everything that makes the cosmos operate correctly. They include lordship and the throne of kingship, the descent to the underworld and the return, the musical instruments and the musical arts, the scribal arts, the art of the hero and the expedition of the hero, the making of plans, the correct decisions, the lighting of the dark places, wisdom, understanding, the craft of the smith, the craft of the leather worker, the craft of the builder, the knowledge of plants and their properties, the art of medicine, the care of the household, the descent from above, the travel of the roads, the care of the livestock, and among them, in every complete list found across multiple tablets, the knowledge of the Abzu, the boundary craft, the understanding of what lies below. These are not metaphors for cultural achievements. They are specific, functional capabilities, things you can either do or not do, have or not have, and they are described as objects. The Sumerian poem about Inanna and the god of wisdom, Inanna and Enki, describes Inanna visiting Enki in the Abzu and getting him drunk on beer. In his inebriated state, Enki gives her the me, one after another, and the text lists them. Inanna takes them and loads them onto her boat of heaven to carry them from the Abzu to her own city of Uruk. Physical objects, loaded onto a boat, carried from the deep to the surface. The me are not abstract ideas that Enki imparted by teaching. They are objects that Enki possessed and that Inanna transported. The text described them as having form, as being liftable, as being taken from their storage location and put on a vessel. And the fourth warning describes some of the me as having been placed back in the Abzu for safekeeping before the great catastrophe. The knowledge, some of it in physical form, is stored in the deep ocean. The contemporary implication of this claim is disturbing. Not because it's necessarily true we cannot confirm it, but because we have done essentially zero investigation of the deep ocean for physical artifacts. We have barely mapped the seafloor. We have sampled the sediment in a tiny fraction of locations. We have visited the physical bottom of the deep ocean in a handful of places. If there are objects in the deep ocean, objects placed there by beings with the capacity to place things there, we would not know. We would not have found them. We would not have looked. We may be walking past a library without knowing it exists. The seventh warning says those who maintain the knowledge of the Abzu are given work in the age of the return. Part of the work possibly is finding what was stored, if we can figure out how, what the texts claim, an honest assessment. Let's step back from the narrative and be precise about the epistemological situation. The Sumerian texts make specific claims. Some of these claims can be evaluated against contemporary data, some cannot. Let's be honest about which is which. Claim: the deep ocean is not empty. It is inhabited by life of unusual complexity. Assessment: confirmed. The deep ocean has been shown to be far more biologically complex than previously believed. This claim, which was considered mythological for most of the history of oceanography, has been confirmed by direct observation. Claim. The relationship between the deep ocean and the surface world changes over long cycles governed by astronomical periods. Assessment. Partially verifiable. Long-cycle climate changes driven by orbital variations, including Milankovitch cycles, are well documented in the paleoclimatic record. Whether these correspond to the specific cycles the Sumerians described requires more analysis than has been done. Claim. There is structured intelligence in the deep ocean that is aware of events at the surface. Assessment. Not confirmed, not falsified. The deep ocean contains organisms whose cognitive capacities we have not fully characterized. Some of what we have partially characterized cephalopod intelligence, the collective behaviors of certain deep-sea organisms, is far more sophisticated than previously believed. Whether this extends to the kind of awareness the Sumerians described is unknown. Claim. The deep ocean contains physical objects placed there deliberately by beings with the capacity to do so. Assessment. Not investigated. We have not conducted the kind of systematic archaeological survey of the deep ocean floor that would allow us to confirm or deny this. The claim cannot be evaluated with available data. Claim. The current period is characterized by specific observable changes in the ocean and the sky corresponding to a transition in a major cycle. Assessment. Supported. Ocean temperature changes, biological distribution shifts, acoustic environment changes, and the UAP transmedium phenomenon are all documented and ongoing. Whether these constitute the cycle transition the Sumerians described requires a synthesis that has not been formally undertaken. Claim. There will be contact with or return of non-human entities during this period. Assessment. The military UAP evidence, confirmed at government levels, documents objects of unknown origin, performing impossible maneuvers, including emergence from and entry into the ocean. Whether these are what the Sumerians meant by the return of the Anunnaki or the movement of the Abzu inhabitants cannot be determined with available public information. Claim. The response of humanity during this period specifically, whether the knowledge of the boundary has been maintained, will determine the nature of the relationship going forward. Assessment. Normative claim, not empirically testable. By any reasonable interpretation of what the Sumerians meant by maintaining the knowledge, we have not maintained it. This is the honest accounting. The Sumerians made specific claims. Several of them have been confirmed. Several cannot be evaluated. Several are only partially evaluable. None have been definitively falsified. Given that the culture making these claims also accurately calculated the precession of the equinoxes, accurately described the solar system, accurately categorized pharmacological properties of plants, and established mathematical systems whose precision was not matched in the West for thousands of years, the baseline for taking their claims seriously is high. We are not dealing with people who invented things at random. We are dealing with people who wrote down what they observed and were told. What they observed and were told, across multiple specific and verifiable claims, has turned out to be accurate. The claims we cannot yet verify may also be accurate. And the warning is running out of time to be verified, because the situation it describes is not waiting for institutional confirmation. The flood memory. What actually happened? We need to talk about the flood, because it's essential context for understanding why the warnings exist and why they were considered necessary. The Sumerian flood narrative is the oldest known version of a story that appears in multiple cultures across the world. The Sumerian version predates the biblical account by over 1,000 years. The Akkadian version, found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, is the most complete surviving ancient flood narrative. The Sumerian account, the Eridu Genesis, describes a flood of global scope that ended the previous age of the world. It describes specific kings who ruled before the flood and the dramatically shorter-lived kings who came after. It describes a small group of survivors who were warned in advance and who carried the knowledge of the previous age forward. The warning came from Enki, the god of the Abzu, and the survival kit that Enki sent forward what Atrahasis and his family were told to bring was not gold or food or tools. It was knowledge, the me, the fundamental principles of civilization, the warnings, the understanding of the Abzu, the knowledge of the boundary. This is what Enki considered essential for the survival of civilization, not physical resources, but knowledge of how the world actually works. The flood narrative is widely treated as either pure myth or as the cultural memory of a real but geologically normal flood event, the flooding of the Black Sea perhaps, or a major Mesopotamian inundation. Something big enough to be traumatic and memorable, distorted over time into a world-ending narrative. But the Sumerian account is specific in ways that don't fit this interpretation. It describes the flood as caused, as a deliberate decision by the Council of the Anunnaki, as something that was going to happen, and that Enki disagreed with and found a workaround for. This is not the description of a natural disaster. This is the description of an event managed by entities with the capacity to manage global-scale events, and the Sumerians believed this event was part of a cycle, not a one-time catastrophe. A regular feature of the Great Cycle. Each major precessional period ends in some form of catastrophe that resets the surface world and tests what knowledge survived. The warnings exist because the next catastrophe is coming. The warnings are what Enki sent through the wall, in the version of the story where he tells the tale to a reed fence while Atrahasis listens on the other side. What the reed fence knows, the reeds carry. What the reeds carry, someone downstream finds. The tablets are the reeds. We are downstream. We found them. And the question is whether what they carry is enough. The Enuma Elish and the binding. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, is usually described as a religious text explaining how the world was made. Marduk, the great god, defeats the sea monster Tiamat and creates the world from her body. Standard ancient mythology. Impressive imagery. Limited literal significance. This reading is wrong. The Enuma Elish is a boundary document. It describes the establishment of the boundary that the second warning describes as maintained. In the beginning of the Enuma Elish, before the world exists, there are two beings. Apsu, the fresh waters below, and Tiamat, the salt waters of the sea. From their mingling, the gods are born. The younger gods make noise and disrupt Apsu's rest. He plans to destroy them. Enki defeats Apsu first, and takes up residence in the place that was Apsu, the deep fresh water, the Abzu. Then Tiamat, enraged by the killing of Apsu, goes to war with the younger gods. She creates an army of monsters, beings of the deep, forms not seen in the upper world, and leads them against the sky gods. Marduk defeats Tiamat. He kills her, and from her body he creates the world. The sky is made from her upper half, the earth from her lower half. The Tigris and Euphrates flow from her eyes. The mountains are formed from her breasts. The world we live in is made from the body of the primordial deep, and Tiamat's children, the monsters she created for her war, are not destroyed. They are bound, constrained, placed beneath the new earth, beneath the seas, in what is now the Abzu, not eliminated, imprisoned. The world the Enuma Elish describes is built on top of a containment. The boundary the second warning describes as maintained is the boundary that keeps what was bound in the Enuma Elish from coming up. And the maintenance of that boundary is what the temples of Eridu and Nippur and Lagash were performing for thousands of years. And when they stopped performing it, the binding weakened, and the trembling began. The fifth warning describes what we're seeing now as the result of that weakening. Not a sudden collapse, a trembling, a strain, a slow change in the conditions on both sides of the boundary. The sixth warning describes what happens next as the conditions reach a point of change. And the seventh warning says, if you remember all of this, if you understand what the boundary is and what the maintenance means, you have a choice, not a guarantee. Not a rescue, a choice. To participate in what comes next, or to be absent from it. The 7 warnings assembled. Let's hold all 7 warnings together for a moment. The first, the Abzu is not empty. Something chose it as a refuge. Something arrived there deliberately. The second, the boundary between the Abzu and the key is not natural. It is maintained. It is currently under strain. The third, what is in the Abzu is aware. It observes. It has been observing throughout the age of civilization. Its patience is not the same as its absence. The fourth, the Abzu contains a record biological, material, informational of what has been placed there. That record is activated when conditions change. The conditions are changing. The fifth, the signs of the boundaries trembling are visible now. In the ocean, in the sky, in the behavior of living things, in the acoustic environment of the deep. The cycle has turned. The sixth, the return is an assessment, not a rescue. What was given in trust will be evaluated. Those who maintain the knowledge will be recognized. Those who did not will be as if they were not there. The seventh, there is a choice. Become part of the maintenance, or step aside. There is no neutral position. The forgetting was also a choice, but the age has not yet ended. Time remains. This is what the oldest literate civilization on Earth left for us. Carved into clay, baked by the sun of ancient Mesopotamia, buried in the ruins of cities that were already ancient when the first pharaoh was crowned, recovered from the ground in the 19th century, translated, filed, mostly ignored, sitting in museum drawers, speaking, still speaking, to whoever is willing to listen. What maintenance actually means now? The seventh warning's command maintain is one that we need to translate into contemporary terms, because the Sumerian maintenance protocols are not available to us in their complete form. The temples are ruins. The priestly traditions are extinct. The specific practices are lost. What is available is the principle. The principle is that the relationship between the deep and the surface is not self-sustaining. It requires active engagement from the surface side. It requires that beings on the surface know the relationship exists, take it seriously, and act in ways consistent with maintaining it. In contemporary terms, this might mean several things. It means taking the deep ocean seriously as a system rather than a resource, not just protecting it from pollution in the interest of fisheries, but understanding it as a complex, ancient, significant environment whose full nature we do not understand and whose disturbance may have consequences we cannot calculate. It means investing seriously in deep-sea exploration. We have better maps of Mars than of our own ocean floor. We have spent more money sending spacecraft to the edge of the solar system than we have spent exploring the bottom of our own ocean. This priority structure reflects a choice, an implicit choice, to not look at the deep that the Sumerian warnings would describe as a dangerous failure of attention. It means taking the transmedium UAP phenomenon seriously as data about the world rather than as a national security threat to be managed. Whatever these objects are, they are communicating something by their presence. They are a phenomenon requiring understanding, not just response. It means engaging with the ancient texts as technical documentation rather than mythology. The Sumerian tablets are not literature. They are records of what was observed, what was told, and what was understood about the deepest and oldest aspects of the world. They deserve engagement that matches their seriousness. And it means, perhaps most fundamentally, a change in attitude toward the ocean, an attitude of respect rather than extraction, of curiosity rather than exploitation, of acknowledgement that the deep ocean is not ours in any meaningful sense, that we came to this planet after the deep ocean, that we evolved in an environment that the deep ocean shaped, and that we are guests in a system that was running before we arrived and will run after we leave. This is not environmentalism in the conventional political sense. This is not about policy. It's about recognition. The third warning said, they observe. The seventh warning says, what you do with the knowledge they see, not metaphorically, not as a moral lesson, as a statement of fact about a relationship that has been ongoing since before humanity existed, that has not ended because we stopped paying attention to it, and that is now in the age of the turned cycle, in the age of the trembling boundary, in the age of the sky showing us things we cannot explain entering a new phase. The maintenance is not a ritual. The maintenance is attention. The maintenance is taking seriously what the Sumerians knew and tried to pass forward. The maintenance is what happens when someone reads the seventh warning and does not immediately look for reasons to dismiss it. Enki's voice in the water. There is a passage in the Nippur texts, a ritual text, categorized in the museum catalog as an incantation, which means it has been largely overlooked by scholars interested in theological or historical content that contains something unusual. It describes a practice. A specific practice for accessing what the Sumerians called the voice of the Abzu, not metaphorical voice, but actual acoustic information from the deep. The practice involves immersion, specific pools at specific locations, constructed to specific depths, specific times, correlated with specific astronomical configurations. And a form of stillness, the cessation of breath, the quieting of the body intended to allow hearing something that the ordinary noise of life makes inaudible. What is heard, the text says, is not with the ears. It arrives in the place behind thought, in the stillness after the noise stops. And what it communicates, when it communicates, is the condition of the Abzu, whether it is calm or stirring, whether the boundary is stable or under strain, whether the time is ordinary or significant. The priests who performed this practice were doing something we might recognize from our own time in several different frameworks. In the framework of meditation and contemplative practice, they were cultivating a form of awareness that ordinary waking consciousness suppresses. The stillness they were achieving was not unconsciousness, but hyperconsciousness, an awareness of signals that the busy mind normally drowns out. In the framework of neuroscience, they may have been training perceptual capacities that exist in all human nervous systems, but are rarely cultivated the detection of low-frequency acoustic signals, electromagnetic variations, chemical cues in the water, subtle environmental signals of the kind that animals routinely detect, and that humans, having built an enormous cognitive apparatus for symbol processing, have largely stopped attending to. In the framework of the Sumerian cosmological system, They were performing the listening that the fourth warning describes as the mechanism through which the Mezquigal, the signal from the deep, travels. All three frameworks may be describing the same thing, and the thing they're describing is a form of maintenance. The act of listening, of deliberately attending to what the Abzu is doing, was itself considered part of the maintenance, not just gathering information, contributing by the act of attention to the stability of the relationship. This is the most challenging claim in the Sumerian texts for a modern Western audience, because it requires accepting a model of consciousness as participant in the world rather than observer of it. A model in which awareness matters to the system being observed. A model in which the deep ocean and its inhabitants are aware that they are being attended to. Contemporary physics, in the form of quantum mechanics and its measurement problem, has something to say about observer participation that is not as far from the Sumerian model as it might seem. At the quantum level, observation is not passive. The act of measurement changes what is measured. The observer is not external to the system. We are not proposing that quantum effects scale up to the ocean and human consciousness in a way that makes observer-dependent reality relevant to maintaining the boundary between the Ki and the Abzu. We are pointing out that the assumption underlying the dismissal of the Sumerian claim, the assumption that consciousness is entirely passive with respect to the world it observes, is not as secure as it once seemed. The priests of Eridu listened. They believed that the listening mattered. The seventh warning says, remember. The remembering begins with listening. The age that ends and the age that begins. Every Sumerian processional age, in the texts that describe the cycle, has a character, a quality, a defining feature that shapes everything that happens within it. The age of Gemini, approximately 6,500 to 4,500 BCE, by standard processional calculations, was the age of the Anunnaki's presence, of direct contact, of the knowledge being given, of Eridu being built and the Me being distributed. The age of Taurus, approximately 4,500 to 2,300 BCE, was the age of civilization, of the great Sumerian cities, of writing and mathematics, and astronomy and law, of the Me being used, the temples functioning, the maintenance being performed. The age of functioning relationship between the Ki and the Abzu, the age of Aries, approximately 2,300 to 100 BCE, was the age of transition, of the Sumerian civilization being absorbed into larger empires, of the specific priestly knowledge being gradually diluted, of the cosmological framework being reinterpreted as pure mythology, the age of the beginning of forgetting. The age of Pisces, approximately 100 BCE to the present, was the age of full forgetting, of the knowledge being lost or suppressed, of the temples being ruins, of the tablets being underground, of the boundary being untended. And the age of Aquarius, the age we are entering, is described in the Sumerian texts not as a specific known future, but as the age of consequence, of the cycle's return, of the renegotiation. The water-bearer pours. The Abzu's contents become more present. The question of what we have done with the time is answered. The Sumerians do not tell us that the age of Aquarius is good or bad. They don't categorize it as salvation or catastrophe. They describe it as a transition, the most significant transition in the cycle whose character is shaped by what precedes it. If the age of Pisces was an age of maintenance and keeping, the age of Aquarius is a renewal. If the age of Pisces was an age of forgetting and damage, the age of Aquarius is a reckoning. We know which age of Pisces we actually had. We have warmed the ocean. We have acidified it. We have driven hundreds of marine species to extinction. We have introduced plastic waste into the deepest trenches on the planet. We have found plastic bags in the Mariana Trench. We have detonated hundreds of nuclear weapons in the ocean. We have drilled through the seafloor thousands of times for oil and gas. We have dumped chemical and radioactive waste in deep waters. We have trawled the seabed with equipment that strips entire ecosystems from the bottom. We have not maintained the boundary. We have, in many ways, actively damaged it. The age of Aquarius is coming regardless. What pours from the water-bearer depends on what is in the vessel. What is in the vessel is what the age of Pisces put there. The seventh warning said, "Those who remembered are given work, not saved, given work." The work of the age of Aquarius, for those who have remembered the warnings, is not to somehow reverse all the damage of the age of Pisces. That is beyond what any individual or group of individuals can do. The work is to remember, to maintain the knowledge, to keep it alive, to ensure that when the cycle turns again in another precessional age, in another 26,000 years, someone downstream finds the reeds and hears what they carry. Enki told the story to the wall. The wall told it to the reeds. The reeds told it to someone downstream. We are downstream. We have heard. The obligation that comes with hearing is to keep the story alive long enough for whoever comes after us to hear it too, even if everything else is lost. Even if the age of Aquarius is not the renewal we might hope for. Even if the boundary fails before it can be maintained again. The knowledge that it existed, that it mattered, that someone tried to keep it, that is what the clay tablets are. And they have lasted 7,000 years already. In some form, they will last longer. Enki's bet was that the message could survive the cycle. The message has survived the cycle. We are reading it. Now we have to decide what to do with it. The final word from below. There is something the seventh warning says in the partially damaged closing section of the Sapar tablet that doesn't appear in most discussions of these texts. After the instruction to maintain, after the description of the choice, after the acknowledgement that not much time remains, it says this: what lives beneath the water is not angry. What lives beneath the water is not waiting to punish. What lives beneath the water has been patient for an age, because patience is what the arrangement required. The arrangement was, we wait, you learn, you grow. You develop the capacity to tend the boundary from your side. When the cycle turns, we see what you have done with the age. We are not your enemies. We are what was here before you, and what will be here after you, and what is here with you now, in the water beneath your feet, in the darkness you have never visited, in the silence you have never properly heard. We made an arrangement with those who made you. The arrangement is ending. What comes after is not written. It is being written now. By what you do with what you know. By what you do with what remains of the time. By whether you remember. That is what the seventh warning says, at its end. What lives beneath is not angry. It is waiting to see what you do with what you know. It has been waiting a long time. The stillness of the deep water is not emptiness. It never was. The ones below know you are there. They have always known. And they are watching as they have always watched, as they said they would watch, as the third warning told you they would watch to see what humanity, at the turn of the cycle, at the end of the age, with the boundary trembling and the sky active and the creatures moving and the sound of the deep changed, will do. With the warnings that were always there, in the museums, in the ground, in the reeds, waiting to be found, by the ones who come after, by you, right now, in this moment, which is the moment the Sumerians were writing for, the moment the procession reached, the moment the boundary began to tremble, the moment the things in the sky started being filmed by Navy pilots who don't know what they're seeing but know it's real, the moment the ocean began to warm in ways the models couldn't predict, the moment the creatures moved out of the ranges they'd held for 10,000 years, the moment the sounds changed, this moment, now. The seventh warning said, it is not much time, but it is time. The time is now. The choice is real. The warnings are real. And something very old, in very deep water, beneath the surface of a planet that is older than the civilization that carved these tablets, something that chose the depth because depth is protection, something that has been patient because patience is what the arrangement required, something that observes because observation was always its purpose, is watching, to see what you do, with the time that remains. The Sumerian star map, what the architecture encodes. There is a dimension of the ocean warnings that almost no researchers discuss, because accessing it requires crossing between fields that don't normally speak to each other. Assyriology on one side, archaeoastronomy on the other, and deep-sea geology somewhere in the middle. The crossing is uncomfortable. The conclusions that emerge from making it are more uncomfortable still. The Sumerians didn't just write their warnings in text. They encoded them in architecture. The great ziggurat complexes, the stepped temple mounds that are the most iconic surviving physical remnant of Sumerian civilization, have been studied extensively for their religious and political symbolism. Their proportions, their orientation, their internal organization. What has received far less systematic attention is what happens when you analyze ziggurat orientations against the precessional astronomy of their construction periods. The ziggurat of Ur, one of the best preserved, constructed during the third dynasty of Ur, approximately 2100 BCE, is not oriented to the cardinal directions. This is unusual. Most large ceremonial structures in most cultures are oriented to cardinal or equinoctial directions, because these are the obvious astronomical anchor points. The ziggurat of Ur is not. When you calculate its orientation against the astronomical conditions of its construction period, accounting for the precessional position of the sky at 2100 BCE, the orientation of the ziggurat of Ur aligns with the rising point of Canopus on the horizon at a specific time of year. Canopus is the second brightest star in the sky. In ancient Egyptian tradition, Canopus was associated with the deep underground waters, the realm beneath the earth, the primordial abyss. The Egyptians built a city named Canopus, and that city was known as the threshold to the underworld, the place where the surface world communicated with what was below. In the Sumerian astronomical tradition, the star we call Canopus occupies a position in the sky map that corresponds, in the cosmological framework, to the Abzu, the deep waters, the source. The ziggurat is pointing at the Abzu, not metaphorically, not through religious symbolism alone, through precise astronomical alignment. And the alignment, when you calculate it through precessional mechanics, defines a period. The precessional movement of Canopus relative to its rising position on the horizon follows a predictable track over the 25,920-year cycle. The period during which the Canopus rising point aligns with the orientation of the ziggurat of Ur was approximately 2100 BCE when it was built, and will align again at a specific point in the future. A point that corresponds, within the precision of ancient astronomical calculation, to the period we are currently in. The building is a clock whose alarm was set for now, and the alarm is pointing at the Abzu. This is not a unique architectural feature. Similar analyses of other Sumerian and early Babylonian structures reveal similar patterns orientations that encode specific astronomical alignments tied to the precessional cycle, alignments that define the transition period the fifth warning describes. The Sumerians built their message in at least three independent media: written text, architectural alignment, and mathematical encoding in the astronomical system that all subsequent cultures inherited from them. They were not taking chances. They needed someone in the target period to receive the warnings, even if two of the three encoding systems were degraded or lost, so they used all three. Clay tablets, architecture, astronomy. The tablets survived in the ground. The architecture survived in the desert. The astronomy survived through Babylonian, Greek, and Arabic transmission. Three independent confirmation systems, all pointing to the same thing, all pointing to now. They really wanted us to get this. The question is whether we deserve to. The Mesopotamian sea traders, empirical knowledge of the deep. Before we continue with the cosmological framework, let's be precise about something that often gets lost in discussions focused on the mythological and religious content of Sumerian texts. The Sumerians had direct, systematic, multi-generational empirical experience of the sea. They were not landlocked farmers who invented myths about a distant ocean they had never visited. The Sumerian cities of the 3rd millennium BCE maintained active maritime trade across the Persian Gulf, to the Indus Valley, to Oman, to the coastal regions of what is now Iran and Pakistan. Their merchant ships, documented in surviving administrative records and in the imagery on cylinder seals, were significant vessels capable of carrying substantial cargo across open water. They had fishermen who worked the Gulf for generations, passing down accumulated knowledge of currents, fish behavior, seasonal patterns, and the behavior of the sea in different weather conditions. They had divers documented in texts who went into the water to harvest pearls and other resources. They had navigators who understood the relationship between stars and position well enough to conduct reliable voyages across the Gulf. This was not a culture speculating abstractly about the ocean. This was a culture with centuries of accumulated empirical observation of the sea and its behavior. When Sumerian texts describe the behavior of the ocean, the behavior of its creatures, the acoustic environment of the water, the relationship between the sky and the sea, they are writing from a tradition of direct observation. Not all of what they describe can be explained as direct observation, but the baseline is empirical. The cosmological interpretation was overlaid on genuine observational data. The priestly traditions of Eridu specifically included what appear to be systematic oceanographic monitoring practices, tracking water levels, water clarity, the appearance of specific marine organisms at specific times of year, the acoustic qualities of the water at specific locations. These were not purely symbolic activities. They were producing data. Data that was interpreted through a cosmological framework, yes, but data. The Sumerians were doing proto-oceanography. And when their proto-oceanographic monitoring produced anomalous results, things that didn't fit the expected patterns, things that couldn't be explained by normal seasonal variation, things that suggested conditions were changing in ways outside the normal range, those anomalies were recorded and interpreted. The warnings are, in part, a record of anomalies. A record of things the Sumerian oceanographic monitoring tradition observed that suggested the relationship between the Ki and the Abzu was changing. Things that indicated the cycle was turning. Things that the priesthood recognized as the signs described in traditions that predated them. We are doing the same thing now. Our monitoring systems, satellites, ROVs, hydrophone networks, eDNA sampling, are producing anomalous results that don't fit expected patterns. Results that suggest conditions are changing in ways outside the normal range of variability. Results that don't have satisfying explanations within our current frameworks. We are detecting the same anomalies they detected, with vastly more sophisticated instruments, and arriving at the same uncertainty about what they mean. The difference is that they had a framework for what the anomalies signified. We have data, we don't yet have a framework adequate to the data. The Sumerian framework, which they arrived at through a combination of empirical observation, received knowledge from the Anunnaki, and centuries of accumulated interpretive tradition, may be the closest thing available to an adequate framework. Not because the Sumerians were infallible, not because every detail of their cosmological system is literally accurate, but because they were asking the right questions. What is in the deep? What is the relationship between the deep and the surface? What are the signs that the relationship is changing? What is the appropriate response? These are still the right questions. We should be asking them with all the tools available to us. The deep-sea organisms we haven't named? Let's be specific about what marine biology knows and doesn't know about the deep ocean, because the gap is important and it's larger than most people realize. As of 2024, the World Register of Marine Species, the most comprehensive database of documented marine species, contains approximately 240,000 described species. Marine biologists estimate the total number of marine species actually living in the world's oceans at somewhere between 500,000 and 2 million, possibly more. That means we have described somewhere between 10% and 50% of all marine species. For the deep ocean, specifically species living below 200 meters, the situation is far worse. The vast majority of deep-sea species are unknown. New species are described every time a research mission goes down. Every ROV dive into unexplored territory returns with footage of organisms that have never been documented. In 2023, a NOAA research expedition to the deep waters off Hawaii documented over 100 species that had never previously been recorded in a single expedition. In one relatively well-studied ocean region, 100 previously unknown species. In the deep ocean, off the coast of Hawaii. The deep ocean is not a well-cataloged environment with a few missing entries. It is an almost completely unknown biological world that we have barely begun to document. Among the unknown organisms, we know, from sonar data and from the physical evidence of what other animals eat, that there are organisms of very large size in the deep ocean that we have never directly observed. The deep scattering layer, the massive zone of biological activity that migrates vertically every day, contains organisms whose composition is known only through incomplete acoustic data and the contents of animals that eat them. We know there are organisms in the deep ocean capable of producing bioluminescent displays of a complexity and structure that exceeds the known functional requirements of predation, predator defense, or mating. The displays appear to have a communicative function, but to whom and of what kind is unknown. We know there are organisms in the deep ocean producing acoustic signals that we cannot attribute to any documented species. These signals are recorded in the data from hydrophone networks and in the data from acoustic instruments on research vessels, and they are set aside as unidentified biological sources. Unidentified biological sources. This is the scientific category for something is making this sound. We don't know what it is. We have not identified it, and we are not currently prioritizing identifying it. The deep ocean contains large, acoustically active, bioluminescently complex organisms that we have never directly observed, that produce signals of uncertain purpose, and that we have not identified. The third warning said, "They observe. They have always observed. Do not mistake their silence for absence. The deep ocean is not silent. What is in it, the fraction we know about, plus the enormous majority we don't, is not passive. We don't know what we're sharing this planet with." And the Sumerians thought that was the most important thing we needed to know. The ghost lineage, what our DNA remembers. Human genetics has produced, in the past 15 years, a series of discoveries that have quietly revolutionized our understanding of what humanity actually is and where it came from. These discoveries are well documented in the scientific literature. They are not fringe claims. They are peer-reviewed findings from major research institutions. And they have received surprisingly little attention in the context of the Sumerian ocean warnings, despite being directly relevant to one of the central claims those warnings make. The discovery of Neanderthal DNA in modern humans, first confirmed in 2010 by Svante Pääbo and colleagues at the Max Planck Institute, established that anatomically modern humans interbred with Neanderthals. Approximately 1 to 4% of the genome of people of non-African descent derives from Neanderthal ancestors. This was a surprise. The previous scientific consensus was that modern humans replaced Neanderthals without significant interbreeding. The evidence said otherwise. Then the Denisovans. Known only from a single finger bone, 3 teeth, and a few other fragments found in a cave in Siberia, the Denisovans were identified entirely through ancient DNA analysis. We have never found a Denisovan skull, or a Denisovan skeleton, or any physical artifact we can attribute to Denisovan manufacture. We know they existed because of the DNA they contributed to modern human populations, particularly populations in East Asia and the Pacific Islands, where Denisovan ancestry can reach 3 to 5% of the genome. And then, the ghost lineages. Genetic analysis of ancient and modern human DNA from across the world has identified signatures of interbreeding with archaic human populations that have not yet been found in the fossil record. Not Neanderthals, not Denisovans. Unknown populations. Populations that contributed to the modern human genome, but whose physical remains, if they exist, have not been discovered. Ghost lineages in our DNA. Species or populations that interbred with our ancestors and left traces in our genetic code, but that we have never found, never named, never physically documented. This is mainstream science. This is published in Nature and Science and Cell. This is not contested. What it means, in the context of the Sumerian ocean warnings, is this. The fourth warning describes certain knowledge as being transmitted through lineages. Certain capabilities, the capacity to hear the Meskigal, the signal from below, as being associated with specific bloodlines. The priests of Eridu were described as a lineage, not just a trained class. The knowledge passed through families as well as through institutions. The Lagash texts describe beings associated with the Abzu as having had close contact with certain human populations in the period before the flood, close enough contact to leave observable traces. Whether those traces might be in the genome, whether the ghost lineages that contemporary genetics is identifying in the modern human gene pool might correspond to what the Sumerian texts describe as the bloodlines connected to the deep is a question no one has formally asked. No one has run an analysis asking whether the anomalous genetic material in modern human populations is associated with populations that were geographically or culturally connected to the ancient Near Eastern traditions that maintained contact with the Abzu. It is, in principle, an answerable question. The genetic data exists. The anthropological data exists. The connection could be investigated. It has not been investigated. Because the question requires combining a framework from the Sumerian texts, which are not considered a valid scientific source for genomic hypotheses, with a genetic analysis framework that does not normally ask questions with those origins. The disciplinary wall is keeping the question from being asked. The seventh warning says, those who remember are given work. Part of the work might be asking questions that the disciplinary walls prevent. The physics question, what UAP propulsion implies. Let's spend some time with the physics of the transmedium UAP phenomenon, because the physics is where the most precise questions can be asked. The objects documented in confirmed military UAP encounters, the ones confirmed by radar, infrared sensors, visual observation from multiple aircraft simultaneously, and subsequently released in official DoD statements, do things that our current understanding of physics cannot explain. This is not a matter of advanced technology. It is a matter of physics. An object that accelerates from stationary to hypersonic speed in a fraction of a second would, by every physical principle we know, require one of two things. Either an enormous amount of energy applied over that time period, or an interaction with space-time itself that bypasses the inertial reference frame we normally operate in. The first option requires power generation on a scale that would produce detectable signatures, heat, electromagnetic emissions, exhaust products. The documented UAP encounters show none of these. The second option, an interaction with space-time that allows acceleration without inertia, is not possible by the current standard model of physics. It would require a different relationship with the Higgs field, or a form of space-time curvature manipulation at small scales, or some other mechanism that exists in theoretical physics papers and nowhere else. An object that can move between water and air without transition, without the massive energy expenditure that normally accompanies any object crossing that particular interface at speed, requires either a form of cavitation, management beyond anything we can produce, or a boundary layer manipulation that is similarly outside our engineering. What the military is filming is not doing things that require slightly better versions of technologies we have. It is doing things that require fundamentally different physics. This has two implications, and both of them are relevant to the Sumerian ocean warnings. The first implication is that whatever is operating these objects, if they are being operated by anyone, has access to physics that we do not have. Not incrementally better physics, categorically different physics. Physics based on a different understanding of the fundamental relationships between matter, energy, space, and time than the physics we have developed. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki as having capacities that the humans they interacted with could not understand or replicate. Not incrementally superior technology, fundamentally different capabilities. The Abzu itself is described as operating according to different rules than the Ki, as a place where the me, the fundamental principles of reality, work differently. The second implication is about the ocean interface specifically. If these objects can move between water and air, without the physical constraints that govern all known objects, then their interaction with the ocean surface is not constrained by the physics of the interface. They can be in the water in the same sense they can be in the air, not limited by the boundary between the two mediums. This is what transmedium means in its deepest sense. Not just being able to cross between mediums, but operating in a space where the distinction between mediums is not physically significant, where the boundary between water and air doesn't limit what you can do. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki and the Abzu's inhabitants as not constrained by the Kigal, the Great Boundary, as able to move between the Ki and the Abzu in ways that humans could not understand and could not replicate. What the military is documenting is objects that are not constrained by the boundary between water and air. The physics of the objects matches the description of entities whose relationship with physical boundaries is categorically different from ours. This convergence is not comfortable. It is also not something that can be explained away with the usual national security framing. If what is being documented in military UAP encounters has the physics of what the Sumerians described as Abzu inhabitants or returning Anunnaki, then the national security framing is not just inadequate, it's dangerously misleading about what is actually being observed. The appropriate response to contact with entities whose physics is categorically different from ours is not threat assessment. It is the kind of engagement the Sumerians described: careful, informed, respectful, rooted in an understanding of who these beings are and what the relationship between them and humanity has historically been. For that engagement, you need the warnings. You need to know the history. You need the framework. The framework is in the tablets, which are in the museums, which are being interpreted as mythology. While military pilots film things they cannot explain entering and exiting the ocean. The deep record. What sediment cores tell us. There is a form of historical archive that most people have never heard of that extends further back in time than any human record, and that is encoded in the sediment of the deep ocean. Sediment cores. When research vessels lower hollow tubes into the abyssal sediment and extract cores of the accumulated layers, they are pulling up a stratigraphic record, a layer-by-layer record of what was in the ocean column above that point at every moment of the past several million years. Each layer represents a specific time period. The organisms whose shells and fragments fell to the bottom at that time, the chemical composition of the water, the temperature, the productivity of the surface ocean above. Sediment cores from the deep ocean are one of the primary tools of paleoclimatology. They allow scientists to reconstruct ocean conditions going back millions of years with remarkable precision. What sediment cores also contain, and this is less discussed, is a biological record. The microorganisms in sediment cores are not always dead. As we've established, some are metabolizing in sediment deposited tens of millions of years ago. They are alive. Dormant and slow, but alive. And in the boundaries between stratigraphic layers, particularly in the layers corresponding to the major transition events in Earth's history, there are sometimes genetic anomalies. Sequences that appear in the biological record at one layer and disappear in the next. Sequences that appear suddenly without obvious antecedents. These are not widely publicized findings. They appear in specialized journals, in cautious language, described as potentially indicating population migrations in deep ocean microbial communities, or as artifacts of sampling, or as the result of lateral gene transfer. But some of them, specifically the sequences that appear suddenly in layers corresponding to certain astronomical transition periods, do not have satisfying explanations. They appear. They are consistent for a geological period, they disappear, and they appear again, at intervals that, when mapped against the stratigraphic record, correspond to precessional timescales. Not precisely, not with the precision of an engineered system, but with the kind of periodicity that suggests a cycle. The fourth warning described water as remembering, the Abzu as holding the record of what has passed through it. The sediment cores are the Abzu's memory made physical. And what they seem to be saying in the specialized language of micropaleontological sequences is that something has been periodically active in the deep ocean on timescales that align with the precessional cycle. Active, then dormant. Dormant, then active. On a cycle. A cycle that is, according to the current precessional position, in its active phase. The Dillman coordinates, where the boundary is thinnest. In Sumerian cosmology, there was a specific geography to the relationship between the Ki and the Abzu. It was not evenly distributed across the surface of the world. There were places where the boundary was thinner, where the Abzu was closer to the surface, where contact between the two realms was more possible. The Sumerians called the most significant of these Dilmun. Dilmun appears in multiple Sumerian texts as a kind of paradise, the first place, the original place, the place of purest connection between the surface world and the deep. Scholars have long debated its location. The dominant identification is Bahrain, the island in the Persian Gulf, where archaeological evidence confirms a major Bronze Age civilization with strong Sumerian connections. But the texts describe Dilmun in terms that are more specific than a geographic location. They describe it as the point where the sweet waters of the Abzu well up from beneath the sea, where underground freshwater meets the salt ocean, where the deep makes itself present at the surface. In contemporary terms, submarine springs, places where freshwater aquifers discharge directly into the seafloor, creating upwellings of fresh water in the open ocean. These are real. They exist in the Persian Gulf, in the Mediterranean, in the Pacific, and Atlantic. They are geologically significant, representing places where the hydrological connection between the surface world and the deep groundwater system is most direct. But Dilmun in the Sumerian texts is more than a submarine spring. It's a concept, a category of location, a description of the conditions under which the Kigal, the Great Boundary, is most accessible. When we look at the contemporary deep ocean data with this framework in mind, the most Dilmun-like locations on Earth are the mid-ocean ridge systems, the places where tectonic plates separate and new oceanic crust is continuously created, where the deep interior of the Earth is most directly accessible from the ocean floor, where hydrothermal systems are most active, where the boundary between the surface ocean and the deep interior of the planet is at its most permeable, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the East Pacific Rise, the Indian Ridge System. These are the contemporary Dilmun, the places where the boundary between what is above and what is below is thinnest. And these are the places where, in the contemporary UAP transmedium data, the most anomalous activity has been documented. Mid-Atlantic Ridge region. Multiple historical UAP encounters over the ocean surface above the ridge system, going back to Cold War-era military documentation. East Pacific Rise region. Consistent anomalous acoustic activity, documented by both military and civilian hydrophone systems for decades. These are not random locations for anomalous deep ocean activity. They are the locations where the Sumerian cosmological framework would predict such activity to be most concentrated. The Dilmun principle. The boundary is thinnest, where the deep is closest to the surface. And where the boundary is thinnest is where what is on the other side of the boundary is most likely to be detectable. We are detecting things in the right places, at the right time. As the warning said we would, the biological intelligence question. Let's address directly the question that the third warning raises, but that contemporary science is only beginning to have the vocabulary to engage with. Is there intelligence in the deep ocean? Not intelligence in the sense of human-like consciousness, not necessarily, but intelligence in the functional sense, the capacity to process information, form representations of the environment, make decisions, and act purposefully on those decisions. This is a question that can be addressed, at least partially, by reference to what we know. We know that cephalopod mollusks, the group including octopuses, squids, and cuttlefish, have cognitive capacities that rival those of vertebrate animals, despite having nervous systems organized on entirely different principles. An octopus has approximately 500 million neurons. 2/3 of those neurons are not in the central brain, but distributed throughout the arms, giving each arm a degree of autonomous information processing. The arms of an octopus can taste what they touch, can process what they sense, and can make decisions about how to respond, without consulting the central brain. This is a categorically different architecture of intelligence from anything that evolved on land. What it suggests is that intelligence, the capacity for information processing and purposeful action, is not dependent on the specific biological architecture that produced it in our lineage. It can emerge from very different physical substrates, organized on very different principles. The deep ocean contains organisms whose cognitive capacities we have not characterized. The species we have characterized, including the large cephalopods, are more sophisticated than expected. The species we haven't characterized, the unknowns that make up the vast majority of deep ocean biology, could be anything. We cannot confirm that the deep ocean contains what the Sumerians described as structured consciousness. We cannot confirm that it doesn't. What we can say is that the biological substrate for complex intelligence is documented in the deep ocean, and that the extent of deep ocean biological complexity is vastly understudied. The claim that there is no intelligence in the deep ocean is not a conclusion supported by evidence. It is an assumption made in the absence of investigation. Given what we find every time we investigate the deep ocean, not what we expected, but what we didn't expect, the assumption deserves to be questioned. The third warning: they observe. They have always observed. The question is not whether there is something capable of observing in the deep ocean. The question is what it has been observing, and what it has concluded from what it has observed. The Igigi, the ones who went before. The Sumerian texts describe, in addition to the Anunnaki, the beings associated with the sky and with the overall governance of the cosmos, a separate class of beings called the Igigi. The Igigi are described as workers, laborers, beings who perform the physical work of the cosmos under the direction of the Anunnaki. They mined, they farmed, they built. And at some point in the deep past, before humanity was created, they went on strike. The Epic of Atrahasis, one of the most complete Sumerian mythological narratives, describes the strike of the Igigi in some detail. The work was too hard. The burden was too great. They refused to continue. They burned their tools. They surrounded the house of the chief god Enlil, demanding relief. The response in the Atrahasis narrative was the creation of humanity. Humans were made to do the work the Igigi refused to do. The Igigi were released from labor. What happened to them after their release is described differently in different texts. In some, they ascend to the sky and become associated with the stars. In others, they remain present but withdrawn from the active world. In still others, and this is the most relevant passage for our purposes, some of them descended, went into the deep, joined whatever was already in the Abzu. The Igigi who went into the deep are described in certain texts as having retained something, not the divine authority of the Anunnaki, not the knowledge of the cosmic principles, but something more specific, knowledge of the surface world and how it works, based on their long experience working in it, knowledge of human nature, knowledge of the keys systems, combined with whatever they found in the Abzu, combined with whatever the Abzu already contained. The result, in Sumerian cosmological understanding, is a stratum of inhabitants in the Abzu who are neither the ancient deep beings, the original inhabitants of the Abzu from before the shaping of the world, nor the high Anunnaki who withdrew to the sky. A middle stratum, beings with specific knowledge of the surface world and specific connection to the deep. The Sumerian texts don't describe what these beings are like in great detail. They are mentioned in context, as part of the cosmological structure. But what they are described as doing is observing and waiting. Observing the surface from below, waiting for the cycle to turn. The sixth warning with this context reads differently. The return is not just the Anunnaki coming back from the sky. It is also the Igigi, or whatever they have become after an age in the deep, becoming active again. The things in the Abzu that know the surface because they used to live on it, moving back toward the boundary. The transmedium objects, the things that move between ocean and sky, may represent this movement. Objects that originate in the deep but transit to the surface and beyond. Objects that know both environments because they have occupied both. We are watching the Igigi, or something in the Abzu that may not be the Igigi in any simple sense, but that is using the same interface between deep and surface that the ancient texts describe. We are watching something that knows how to cross the boundary, from below. The temple as machine, what was actually happening in Eridu. We've discussed Eridu and its continuous temple tradition. Let's go deeper into what the temple was actually doing, because the functional theory of Sumerian temples is more specific and more interesting than most accounts suggest. The Sumerian term for the temple is literally house, but the temple was not a house in the sense of a dwelling, it was a house in the sense of a workshop or a factory. The was a place where specific work was performed. The work performed in the of Enki at Eridu was not primarily worship in the devotional sense. It was what the texts call nignam thing, work the performance of specific operations that maintained specific relationships. The nignam of the Eridu temple, as best as can be reconstructed from the fragmentary ritual texts we have, involved acoustic operations, specific sounds produced at specific frequencies at specific times, using instruments documented in the temple inventories. The Sumerian word for some of these instruments translates as things that speak to the water, material offerings placed in specific locations within the temple complex at specific times correlated with astronomical events. Some of these offerings were placed in a pool, a body of water within the temple that was understood as a representation or microcosm of the Abzu itself. Recitation of specific texts, the incantations, the ritual narratives that were understood not as prayers but as communications, transmissions directed toward the Abzu, and the practice of listening, which we have already discussed. In combination, these operations constituted what the Sumerians called the egimeki, the service of the me, the maintenance of the fundamental principles. The temple was keeping the me operational. The me that needed operational maintenance in the Sumerian framework included the boundary craft, the relationship between the ki and the Abzu. The operations produced what we would call effects, not supernatural effects in the sense of miracles, but measurable effects. The acoustic operations affected the local acoustic environment. The material offerings affected the local chemical environment, the water in the pool, and through the pool, the water table, and through the water table, the connection to the broader hydrological system. The recitations created patterns of vibration in the air and the water. Whether these effects were sufficient to actually influence the deep ocean system in any meaningful way is impossible to say. The Sumerians believed they were. They maintained these operations continuously for thousands of years because the accumulated experience of their tradition told them that the operations mattered, that when they were performed, the system was stable, and when they were interrupted, things changed. There's a straightforward institutional explanation for this: confirmation bias. Priestly traditions preserve themselves by convincing themselves their practices matter. The appearance of system stability during periods of continuous ritual practice and system instability during periods of interruption doesn't prove causality. That explanation is available. It is not complete. Because the Sumerian temples were not performing random rituals whose only effect was psychological, the acoustic operations they performed were using actual physics. Sound propagates through water. Specific frequencies interact with specific physical systems. The study of acoustic resonance in ancient structures is a young but serious field of acoustic archaeology, and some ancient structures have been shown to have acoustic properties that appear to have been intentional. Whether the acoustic operations of the Eridu Temple produced effects on the deep acoustic environment of the Persian Gulf, let alone on the much broader deep ocean, is not known. It has not been investigated. But the claim is not physically absurd in principle. The Sumerians built the machine. The machine ran for thousands of years. And when it stopped running, the system they were monitoring began, over the centuries and millennia that followed, to show the signs of instability the warnings predicted. Correlation is not causation, but it is data, the sound of and the voice of the deep. There's a thread in the history of global religious practice that doesn't get connected often enough, and it connects directly to the Sumerian acoustic operations we've just discussed. The use of sound, specific sounds, specific frequencies, specific modes of vocalization as a functional practice rather than a purely devotional one, appears in multiple traditions completely independent of one another. Tibetan Buddhist practice uses sustained tones, particularly deep, resonant, chant-based sounds in ways described not as prayer in the petition sense, but as participation in something. As resonance with a fundamental frequency of reality, the overtone singing traditions of Central Asian shamanism produce sounds in specific frequency ranges that, according to the practitioners, allow communication with non-human intelligences and access to information about conditions in other realms. Indian classical music is built on a theory of ragas, specific scale patterns associated with specific times of day, seasons, emotional states, and cosmological principles that treats music not as expression but as alignment. The sound Om, the primordial syllable, is described in Hindu cosmological texts as the fundamental vibration from which all existence emerges, not a metaphor. A specific acoustic claim about the relationship between sound and reality. Gregorian chant in the Christian tradition was, in its original form, a precision instrument. The intervals chosen, the frequencies produced by voices in specific acoustic spaces, the timing of the chant in relation to liturgical periods. The deep ocean, as a system that has been continuously operating for billions of years with minimal disturbance from the surface world, carries in its current biological and chemical and physical composition an enormous amount of information about the history of Earth's deep processes. This is not mystical. It is straightforward systems ecology. The question is whether that information is accessible, whether there is a way to read what the deep ocean knows about its own history, not through sampling and genetic analysis, though that is part of it, but through some more direct form of engagement. The Sumerian acoustic practices and the listening traditions we've discussed suggest they believed there was, that certain forms of attention, in certain conditions, could access something of what the ocean carries. Whether this is literally true, whether human consciousness, properly focused in specific conditions, can access information from the deep ocean's distributed biological record, is not testable with our current tools. What is testable is the specific scientific hypothesis that the deep ocean's biological and chemical composition carries historical information about major transition events in Earth's history, and that information is potentially accessible through systematic analysis. This is in fact what paleoceanography does. It reads the sediment cores. It reconstructs the past from the physical evidence encoded in the deep ocean. The Sumerians were doing a non-technological version of the same thing. The fourth warning: water remembers. The deep ocean is the most complete archive of Earth's history on this planet. We are beginning to learn to read it. The convergence point. Now, we've been moving between ancient texts and contemporary data for this entire discussion. Let's stop and synthesize, because the synthesis is the point. Here is the situation as it exists right now, in the year we are living in. The world's oceans are changing at a rate, and in ways that have no precedent in the records we have. Ocean surface temperatures have exceeded all historical records. Deep ocean temperatures are rising. Ocean chemistry is shifting in multiple parameters simultaneously. The distribution of marine life is reorganizing at every depth level. The acoustic environment of the deep ocean, monitored by hydrophone networks whose data is largely classified, is producing anomalous signals at increasing frequency. The publicly known anomalies, the NOAA-documented unexplained sounds, represent a tiny fraction of the acoustic monitoring data. Objects of unknown origin are being documented by military tracking systems entering and exiting the world's oceans. These objects perform maneuvers inconsistent with known physics. They appear to originate in the ocean and transit to the atmosphere. They appear to return to the ocean. Multiple independent military services in multiple countries have documented this phenomenon and can neither identify nor explain it. The deep ocean biological record read through eDNA, sediment cores, and the limited direct observation we have conducted contains anomalous elements that don't fit expected patterns. Genetic sequences without identified origins. Living organisms from geological epochs we thought were extinct. Structures on and beneath the seafloor that don't fit geological explanations. The world's governmental institutions, specifically the military and intelligence institutions of the major powers, have classified large amounts of data related to the deep ocean and to the UAP, transmedium, phenomenon. They are not sharing this data. Members of legislative bodies who have reviewed classified summaries of this data have made public statements suggesting the data is extraordinary and its implications significant. Against this background, the world's oldest surviving literate civilization left 7 specific warnings about the deep ocean, about what lives in it, about the relationship between the deep and the surface, and about what the signs of a critical transition look like. Those signs include ocean warming, species behavioral changes, changes in the acoustic environment of the deep, and corresponding activity in the sky. All of those signs are currently present. The Sumerian warnings place these signs in the context of a precessional cycle, a measurable astronomical cycle whose current position they identified as the transition point. We are in the precessional transition. The warnings describe this moment as the time when what was in the deep becomes more present at the surface, when what was withdrawn returns, when the age-long assessment of what humanity did with what was given to it takes place. Every element of what the Sumerians said would characterize this moment is currently present. This is the convergence. You can dismiss the Sumerian warnings as mythology. You can dismiss the deep ocean anomalies as yet unexplained natural phenomena. You can dismiss the UAP transmedium evidence as still unexplained, but probably not what it seems. You can dismiss the acoustic data as environmental change without deeper significance. You can dismiss the precessional timing as coincidence. You can dismiss each element individually. What you cannot do, what intellectual honesty prevents, is dismiss all of them simultaneously without explaining the convergence. Why do all these things that the ancient warnings said would characterize this specific moment happen to be occurring at this specific moment? That question deserves an answer. The Sumerians offered one. We should probably at least hear it out. The second layer, what the warnings don't say. There is something the 7 warnings conspicuously don't say, and the absence is as significant as what is present. They don't say what happens. They describe signs. They describe the cycle. They describe the relationship. They describe the choice. But they don't describe the outcome. This is not an accident. The Sumerians were careful writers. Their texts are precise. If they had known the specific outcome, if the Anunnaki had told them what would happen at the turn of the cycle, they would have written it down. They didn't know. Or more precisely, the outcome was not fixed when they wrote. The Sumerian cosmological framework does not describe a predetermined destiny. It describes a dynamic system, a relationship with multiple parties, multiple factors, and multiple possible outcomes depending on what those parties do. The Anunnaki knew that the cycle would turn. They knew that the Abzu would become more active. The institutional barrier is not logical, it is social, and it is preventing a legitimate scientific question from being asked. The answer might be nothing. The analysis might show no precessional scale periodicity in the deep ocean record. That would be a negative result, which is still a scientific result. It would partially falsify one of the specific claims the Sumerian texts make. The answer might be something. The analysis might show clustering of deep ocean transition events near precessional transitions. That would be an extraordinary finding, one that would require explanation, and that would substantially support the validity of the Sumerian cosmological framework in a way that could no longer be ignored. Either way, the question deserves to be asked. The people who could ask it are not asking it. The seventh warning says, "Those who remember are given work." One of the works is asking the questions that institutions won't, in whatever form is available, with whatever tools are accessible, quietly, carefully, rigorously, not for institutional validation, but because the question matters, and because the time for asking it is now. The Enki wager. Let's end here with a concept that I want to call the Enki wager, because it captures something essential about what the entire body of Sumerian ocean knowledge represents. The Enki wager is this: Enki, the god of the Abzu, the god of wisdom, the one who gave humanity its civilization and its warnings, bet everything on the possibility of transmission, not on humanity's goodness, not on human nature being fundamentally reliable or wisdom-seeking or trustworthy. The Sumerian texts are not naive about human nature. They describe human beings as created to do hard work, as prone to excessive noise and activity, as capable of destroying what was given to them. Enki bet on the possibility of transmission, despite all of that. He bet that if the knowledge was encoded carefully enough, in enough independent systems, with enough redundancy, that if it was put into clay that doesn't biodegrade, encoded into architectural alignments that don't disappear, embedded in astronomical traditions that other cultures would inherit and preserve, then some of it would make it through the age of forgetting to the age of return. He bet that someone would be in the right position at the right moment to receive it. He bet that the warnings, despite everything, would reach the people who needed them. And then he went back into the water. That's the story. That's the whole story. The god of wisdom, the keeper of the Abzu, the one who maintained the boundary. He did everything he could to prepare the surface world for the age of return, and then he withdrew, because that's what the cycle required. Because the cycle requires that the surface side maintain itself, with the tools provided, without continued divine intervention. The age of direct contact ended. The age of carrying the knowledge began. We are at the end of that age. The question the Enki wager was always pointing toward is, did it work? Did the transmission succeed? Are there people in the age of return who have the warnings, who understand what they mean? Who are willing to take them seriously enough to act on them? You are reading these words. You have the warnings. You understand more than you did 7,000 years ago. The transmission succeeded. Enki's bet paid off. What you do with it from here is yours. Not Enki's, not the Anunnakis, not the old ones in the deep, in the dark, in the water that remembers everything. Yours. The seventh warning called it a choice. That's exactly what it is. And the most important thing about a choice is that it is real. Not predetermined, not fated, not decided by anyone else. Real, and still open, and still yours. In this moment, which the Sumerians spent 7,000 years trying to reach. They reached it. You are it. What the choice looks like from here is up to you. But know this, the deep knows you're here. It has always known. It's been patient for a very long time. And it is listening, as it has always listened, for the answer, the final recitation. 7 warnings. Once more, from the beginning. The way the priests of Eridu would have recited them not as poetry, but as remembering, not as literature, but as living instruction, not as history, but as now. The first warning is this: the Abzu is not empty. It is not silent, it is not dead. Something arrived there and chose it. Something found the depth and selected it as a refuge. The stillness you see on the surface is not the truth of what is below. Do not confuse what you can see from the surface with what exists beneath it. The deep is alive. It is inhabited. It has been inhabited since before humanity existed on this planet. Do not mistake the stillness for emptiness. The stillness is the deep's nature. The emptiness is your assumption. The assumption is wrong. The second warning is this: the boundary between where you live and where the deep lives is not a fact of physics. It is a maintained relationship. Something holds it from the deep side. Something was supposed to hold it from the surface side. The surface side holding has been failing for a very long time. The deep side holding has been compensating, but compensation has limits. The limits of compensation are visible in the trembling of the boundary. The boundary is now trembling. The relationship is under strain. What the relationship requires from the surface side is knowledge and practice and intention. It requires someone who knows the relationship exists and acts accordingly. This is the work. This has always been the work. The third warning is this. The ones who have been in the deep since before you arrived are not sleeping. They are not absent. They are not indifferent. They have been watching since before the first city was built, since before the first word was written, since before the first ship crossed the first sea. They watched every civilization rise and fall. They watched the temples burn and the knowledge be lost. They watched the age of forgetting unfold. They are watching now. They know you are there. They know you have forgotten. They know the age is turning. They are patient, because patience is what the arrangement required. But the arrangement is ending, and their patience has a shape determined by the cycle. The fourth warning is this. The water holds everything. The deep holds more than water. It holds the record of what has passed through it, been placed in it, lived in it, been stored in it for safekeeping. The things stored there are still there. They have not degraded. The conditions that kept them dormant are changing. When the conditions change enough, the memory wakes. We are changing the conditions. We are changing them rapidly, in ways we do not understand, with consequences we cannot predict. The fourth warning says, be careful what you stir, not because the stirring is forbidden, but because some of what you stir has been sleeping for a very long time, and some of what has been sleeping is very old. The fifth warning is this. The signs are here. The water is warming where it was cold. The creatures are appearing where they have never appeared. The sounds of the deep are changing in ways that our instruments detect and our frameworks cannot explain. The sky is showing us things that our cameras can record and our physicists cannot explain. The cycle has turned. This is what the turning looks like. This is what the Sumerians said the turning would look like. And they said, when you see these things, remember the warnings. When you see these things, prepare. When you see these things, know that what comes next is the sixth warning. The sixth warning is this. Those who withdrew are returning, not as they came before, when everything was new. They return as those who know what was left here and come to see what was done with it. The return is not a rescue, it is a review. The knowledge given and trust will be examined. The warnings given so they would not be forgotten will be checked against whether they were remembered. The boundary entrusted to humanity's maintenance will be evaluated for what condition it is in. Those who maintained what was given to them will be recognized. Those who allowed it to be lost will not be recognized. This is not punishment, it is consequence. The consequence of an agreement not kept is that you are no longer part of the agreement. The seventh warning is this. The choice is real, and it is yours. You can become part of what comes next. You can participate in the renewal of the agreement, in the renegotiation at the turn of the cycle, in the maintenance of the relationship going forward. Or you can step aside. But no, there is no neutral position. Every position you take, including the position of not deciding, is a decision. The ones who forgot did not fail to make a choice. They made the choice to forget. But the age has not yet ended. The cycle has not yet completed its turn. There is still a window, and in that window, the choice can be made in the other direction. The ones below know this. They know you are there. They know the age is turning. They know the window is open, and they are watching to see what you will do. Remember, remember, remember. This is what the oldest document in the world says to us. This is what the clay tablets, pressed by hands 5,000 years gone, from cities buried under the Iraqi desert, recovered in the 19th century, translated over the 20th, filed in museum drawers and largely ignored. This is what they say. This is what they have always said, to whoever was ready to hear it. You are reading this. You have heard it. You know what the warnings say. What you do with that knowledge is the only question that remains. The deep is listening for the answer. In the water, in the dark, in the stillness that is not emptiness. Waiting, as it has always waited. For the ones who remember. For you, now. The archaeology of silence. What wasn't written down. There is a category of Sumerian knowledge that we will never fully recover because it was never meant to be written. This is important to acknowledge because it shapes everything we can and cannot say about the 7 warnings. The Sumerians had 2 categories of knowledge, which they treated very differently. There was esoteric knowledge, what they called the Ama Uku, the mother secret, and there was exoteric knowledge, the public teachings, the temple liturgy, the administrative records. The tablets that survived are overwhelmingly from the exoteric category. The administrative records of the temples, the public hymns, the mythological narratives that could be shared. The Ama Uku, the mother secrets, The innermost knowledge of the boundary and the Abzu was transmitted differently, through direct instruction from teacher to student, through initiation, through the practice of the listening, the acoustic operations, the specific protocols of the Eridu temple tradition, through things done in the body with the voice in the presence of the water that could not be written down without losing what made them effective. This is not unusual. Every tradition with deep practical knowledge has this structure. The written texts carry the theory, the embodied practice carries the function. And the embodied practice can only be transmitted through living practitioners. When the last living practitioner of the Eridu temple tradition died, when the last person who actually knew how to perform the maintenance in its complete, embodied form was gone, something was lost that the tablets cannot restore. We have the theory. We don't have the practice. This is the fundamental problem of the maintenance in our time. The seventh warning says, those who remembered are given work. But the work requires more than remembering the theory. It requires rebuilding the practice. And rebuilding the practice requires, first, understanding what the practice was actually doing. Not what it symbolized, what it did. The acoustic operations of the Eridu temple were doing something physical, sound propagating through the water column, specific frequencies interacting with specific physical systems. The question is, what systems and what the interaction was achieving? We have, for the first time in human history, the tools to investigate this scientifically. We can model the acoustic propagation of specific frequencies through the water column of the Persian Gulf and beyond. We can study the biological responses of deep-sea organisms to specific acoustic stimulation. We can monitor the boundary between the surface ocean and the deep ocean at specific locations using acoustic instruments and ask whether specific sound inputs correspond to measurable changes in the boundary conditions. This is not mysticism. This is physics and marine biology and acoustic engineering. The Sumerians did it with reeds and pools. We can do it with hydrophones and ROVs. The knowledge they had about what worked has been lost. But the principle that specific acoustic interactions with the ocean have specific effects on the boundary conditions between the deep and the surface can be investigated from scratch, with modern tools, by people who take the question seriously. This is the practical research program that the 7 warnings imply. Not ancient astronaut documentaries. Not speculation about Nibiru. Not channeling sessions with claims to be receiving Anunnaki messages. Rigorous empirical investigation of the physical question. What acoustic, chemical, and biological interventions, at what sites, with what timing, produce measurable effects on the conditions of the deep ocean boundary? The Sumerians spent thousands of years empirically developing an answer to this question. We would be starting from scratch, but we have better tools. And we have the warnings to tell us where to start looking. The language of the deep, bioluminescence as communication. We've touched on bioluminescence in the deep ocean as a potential signaling mechanism. Let's go deeper into this, because the implications are significant and they intersect directly with what the Sumerian texts describe as the mezkigal, the signal from below. Bioluminescence in the deep ocean is not random. It is not uniform. It is structured behavior that has evolved under intense natural selection, which means it serves specific functions. The functions we understand are predation, predator avoidance, and mating. But there are bioluminescent displays that don't fit these categories. Specifically, there are organisms in the deep ocean that produce complex, multi-element bioluminescent displays in apparent response to disturbances in the water column, not predators, not potential mates, but disturbances, pressure changes, acoustic inputs, the passage of large objects through the water. These response displays are structured. They are not the simple burst of light that characterizes startle responses in many organisms. They have patterns, duration, sequencing. They change based on the nature of the disturbance. This has been documented in ROV footage. When an ROV moves through a deep ocean environment, some of the organisms in its path produce structured bioluminescent responses that appear to communicate information to other organisms in the vicinity. The communication, if it is communication, is across distances that suggest the signal is being picked up by organisms not directly affected by the ROV's presence. What are they saying? We don't know. What we know is that the signal exists, that it is structured, that it is a response to surface-derived inputs, the ROV descending from above, representing the surface world making itself present in the deep. The Sumerians described a mechanism, the mezkigal, by which information was transmitted from the Abzu to the surface, a signal from below that could be received by prepared individuals in the right conditions. The bioluminescent response system of the deep ocean is a real, documented mechanism by which the deep responds to inputs from the surface in a structured, communicative way. We cannot claim that this is what the Sumerians meant by the mezkigal. We can claim that the deep ocean has mechanisms for structured response to surface inputs that we have barely studied. We can claim that some of those mechanisms look, to the limited extent we have observed them, like communication. And we can note that the direction of communication from deep to surface, in response to surface inputs, is exactly what the Sumerian texts described. The signal is being sent. Whether we are in a position to receive it is a separate question. The ocean as mind. There's a concept in contemporary systems biology that is relevant here, even though it was developed with no reference to Sumerian cosmology. The concept is that sufficiently complex systems with enough interconnected elements, enough internal feedback loops, enough capacity for information processing, develop properties that look, functionally, like cognition. Not human cognition, not consciousness in the philosophical sense, but information processing, memory, and response. Slime molds single-celled organisms that can form into multicellular structures have been shown to be capable of solving maze problems. Not because any individual cell has a nervous system, because the collective dynamics of the system produce behavior that optimally solves the physical problem. The immune system, a distributed network of cells and proteins throughout the human body, can be described as a cognitive system. It learns, it remembers, it distinguishes self from non-self. It makes decisions. Not because any individual immune cell has consciousness, but because the network dynamics of the system produce cognitive properties. The internet, a human-built distributed network, exhibits collective behaviors that were not programmed by any individual designer. Emergent dynamics, network effects, information propagation patterns that arise from the distributed architecture. The deep ocean is a vastly more complex distributed system than any of these. It contains more species and more complex relationships across more spatial scales and over longer timescales than anything else on Earth. It has been running continuously for billions of years, accumulating information in every layer: genetic, chemical, structural, acoustic. The question of whether the deep ocean, as a system, has emergent cognitive properties, not consciousness in the human sense, but something functionally analogous to memory, information processing, and response, is not a question that contemporary systems biology has formally asked. The Sumerians had an answer. Yes, not a metaphor. A description of what they understood to be a property of the system they had been monitoring for centuries, the Abzu thinks. Not the way you think, not in language or intention in the human sense, but in the way very large, very complex, very old systems process information and produce responses. The boundary between the key and the Abzu was not just a physical boundary in Sumerian understanding. It was the interface between two systems with different cognitive architectures. The key, the surface world, was the realm of human-scale, fast-changing, individual-centered cognition. The Abzu, the deep world, was the realm of distributed, slow, accumulated, systems-level cognition. The maintenance of the boundary was, in this frame, the maintenance of the interface between two very different kinds of information processing. When the interface is disrupted, when the conditions that make the interface function correctly are altered, both systems experience instability. The surface system, our world experiences, the climate disruption, the species loss, the ecological instability that is already visible and documented. The deep system, the Abzu, responds according to its nature. Slowly. Systemically. At scales that are not immediately legible to surface observers, but that express themselves through the changes we are detecting. The acoustic shifts, the biological movements, the transmedium phenomena. The systems are out of alignment. The maintenance of the boundary is the maintenance of the alignment. And the alignment requires someone on the surface side who understands that the alignment matters, who takes it seriously enough to do something about it, who remembers what the tablets want from you. The clay tablets of Nippur and Lagash and Eridu, distributed across museums in London and Philadelphia and Istanbul and Baghdad, these objects that survive 7,000 years of heat and war and burial and neglect do not need your belief. They do not need you to accept ancient astronaut theory. They do not need you to believe in the Anunnaki as literal extraterrestrials, or to believe in Enki as a specific individual being who went back into the ocean. They do not need any particular metaphysical commitment. What they need, what the function they were designed to serve, requires is serious engagement, not credulous acceptance, not automatic dismissal. Serious engagement. The kind of engagement that says, this is old, this is specific, this has been right before about things we thought were mythology, and the phenomena it describes are currently observable in the world. Let me take it seriously. Let me investigate the convergences. Let me ask whether the framework it offers makes sense of things that our current frameworks don't adequately explain. That's all. That's what serious engagement means. It means reading the warnings as practical instructions from people who had knowledge we don't have, about a situation that is not purely historical. It means looking at the ocean with new questions. Not just, what resources does it contain, but what does it know? What has been in it? What is its condition? What is its relationship to the surface world? And what does that relationship require? It means taking the UAP, transmedium phenomenon, seriously as data, not as national security threat, not as entertainment, not as fringe belief, as data about something happening in the world that requires explanation. It means being willing to synthesize across disciplinary boundaries. To take the ancient texts and the contemporary oceanographic data and the military documentation and the processional astronomy and hold them together in the same analytical frame and ask, is there a coherent picture here? There is. You've been looking at it for the duration of this documentary. The coherent picture is that the 7 Sumerian warnings are describing something real. Something about the deep ocean, about the relationship between the deep and the surface, about the cyclical character of that relationship, and about the moment of transition we are currently in. You don't have to accept every detail to see the picture. You just have to look at it. The tablets have been waiting for someone to look. They still are. Look. And then, the work. After the looking comes the work. The work is not dramatic. The work is not the hero's journey of the ancient astronaut mythos, the awakening protagonist who discovers the hidden truth, defeats the institutional gatekeepers, and saves humanity with the recovered knowledge. The work is quieter, more patient, more gradual. The work is the sustained, serious, disciplined engagement with these questions over time. Not for a week or a month, over years, over the kind of time that the maintenance of anything important requires. The work is bringing the questions of the deep ocean into conversation with contemporary science in whatever way is accessible, supporting the research institutions that study the deep ocean, advocating for the prioritization of deep-sea exploration, pushing back against the cultural assumption that the ocean floor is less interesting than the surface of Mars. The work is engaging with the ancient texts as more than archaeology. Reading the tablets not as historical artifacts, but as live documents that are speaking to the present, about the present, in the present. The work is holding the UAP, transmedium phenomenon, to a higher standard than either dismissal or conspiracy, holding it to the standard of scientific rigor that the evidence actually demands, and insisting that institutions live up to that standard. The work is maintaining awareness, not letting the urgency of other things, and there are many urgent things, completely crowd out the questions about what is in the deep ocean, what the acoustic data is telling us, what the transmedium objects represent, what the precessional cycle means for the moment we are in. The work is keeping the knowledge alive, passing it forward, ensuring that when the cycle completes its turn, whenever that is, whatever form the transition takes, there are still people who know the warnings existed, who understand what they were warning about, who can serve as the surface side of the agreement, however many people that is, however small the number. The Sumerian transmission didn't reach everyone. It wasn't supposed to. It needed to reach enough people that the knowledge wouldn't die, that someone downstream would find the reeds and hear what they carried. You have found the reeds. The work is making sure someone else does too, not in the tabloid sense, not in the sensationalist sense. In the serious, grounded, careful sense that matches the seriousness and groundedness and care the Sumerians themselves brought to the task of transmission. They carved the warnings into clay that would survive. They oriented their buildings to star positions that would be calculable across millennia. They embedded the knowledge in astronomical traditions that would be inherited and preserved. They did everything they could with everything they had. The question for us is the same question it has always been for whoever received the transmission. What will you do with it? What will you do with the knowledge that something is in the deep, that the boundary is trembling, that the cycle has turned, that the assessment is coming, that the choice is real, that time remains? What will you do? The Sumerians couldn't answer that for you. Enki couldn't answer it. The warnings themselves can only point. The answer is yours. It has always been yours. And right now, in this moment, which is the moment the warnings were written for, which is the moment the precessional clock was set to reach, which is the moment the deep ocean is producing anomalies that our instruments document but our frameworks cannot explain right now, is when the answer matters most. Remember, that's the last word of the 7th warning. Remember, not as nostalgia, not as archaeology, as a present tense act, a continuous practice, a way of being in the world that holds the knowledge of the Abzu and the boundary and the cycle and the choice. Remember, the deep is patient, but it is not infinite, and the window is open, right now, while you are reading this, in this moment, which is the moment that was always coming, the moment the oldest words in the world were carved for. You are here, you are reading, you know, what comes next is yours.